Hello everyone, welcome into my latest live video. Today we're a little later than normal because I wasn't quite sure if we were gonna have the time to do this today, but what ended up happening, to catch you up, and those of you who aren't members and missed yesterday's show, is, well, I was doing the final cable management here on the FLP02, and if you missed this build, this was Sunday's build. This is a 90s era inspired case. It's brand new, and it's a modernized version of a standard 90s beige tower computer, but it has slight tweaks to it to accept today's modern parts. And go back and watch the video for more details, but essentially I was trying to move over a system that I had built previously that I wasn't happy with the end result, and I set it aside for, I was so frustrated, I just said I'll do this another day. And things started to work themselves out, and we got the parts moved into this new case. However, the Thermaltake liquid cooler has been a thorn in my side regardless of what case I put it in. It's just a horribly designed cooler, and once I did finally get it installed where I was happy with it, it's making a buzzing sound, a gurgling sound. So I think it's got air in the system. It's a brand new cooler. Unfortunately, I'm long past my 30-day return period, and honestly, I was just being cheap just because I already had the cooler. It's painted a certain color to match the case, and it was more about how it looks. And it's part of the reason I wasn't happy with the final build prior to moving everything into this case, is the cooler has a buzzing sound to it. One of the other things I didn't like about the cooler is the number of cables it has. It's an extraordinary amount of cables for just 2 fans and a cooler. And those cables are extraordinarily long and difficult to manage, and Thermaltake is not keeping up with the competitors in using cable-free fan connections and minimizing cable usage. As a result, I cannot at this time recommend any Thermaltake products. I think they've lost their way, and they don't eat their own dog food. I don't think they build in their own machines, because they would come to the same frustrations that I've come to. And especially if they ever use any of their competitors' products. I would argue that Thermalright offers a better cooler at half the price. I was just going for this weird, unique color. Now, this case has no case panel, no transparent panel. So there's no reason to use, any RGB on this to begin with. And my question to myself is, yes, we've got it all working. The cooler does function, but it shouldn't be buzzing and gurgling. And how many times do I want to take this cooler out and reinstall it? I mean, once ought to be enough. It usually is. And it wasn't like the cooler was given to me for free or anything. It's, we paid our hard-earned money for it. And again, primary concern was the aesthetic of the case, to have this certain color theme all the way through, which meant buying everything from Thermaltake. Thermaltake's screen that we bought to go onto their case didn't work right. It still doesn't work right. It didn't include the right cable. I had to fight with them to get the cable, which they knowingly are aware of the wrong cable being included for certain cases, and still required proof of purchase and had me jump through hoops instead of just apologizing and sending me a 75-cent cable. So, I don't know how to express how disappointed and frustrated I am with Thermaltake, because I want to like them, but they make it really hard to like them. So I think me and Thermaltake, we're going to take a break indefinitely. We're going to focus on other manufacturers who seem to be more customer concentrated and who know that their parts fit together well. That's the idea. If we're getting this cooler, it wasn't because of anything other than it should fit in the case it was designed for and match the color of the case. And since it doesn't match the color of this case, I didn't care, because we're going to put a solid panel here. 90s computers didn't have transparent panels unless you got a Sawzall and did it yourself. And, I forgot that it was buzzing. So once we put it in and I started to cable manage it, and I'm looking at this ton of cabling with this cooler, just the liquid cooler, I was like, before I deal with this hassle, what's making this noise? So the question is, would I sell this to a customer? Would I say the buzzing sound is, after all the effort I've been through to get this thing installed and then to turn around and do all the cable management, just to end up with a buzzing sound, which I forgot it was doing. Would that be close enough for me to go, here you go, customer, here's your computer bill? Of course not. So if it's not good enough to sell to a customer, if it's an embarrassment, if it makes me look bad, like I've either installed it wrong, I don't know what I'm doing, or I made a poor selection of parts, why would I want to expose that to my customer? So this cooler could be sent in for warranty replacement. I'm long past my 30-day return period. But again, I think Thermaltake and we're going to take an indefinite break. I'm fed up. It's just too many things going wrong when it all should have gone easier because it was all Thermaltake. But because it was all Thermaltake, it all went more difficult. Like literally, I could have bought anybody else's cooler and probably would have had none of these problems. So the truth is on the screen as well. You could have bought anybody else's screen and software and probably not have the issues I'm having with Thermaltake's LCD screens. And if you go on a Google search about Thermaltake's RGB software and screen controls, they're one of the worst rated and most talked about, complained about on Reddit from any manufacturer. And I can understand if the product's brand new, but it's been out a few years now. So, you know, these screens and their software, they've been updated and they're still not working right. So, so when Silverstone said, hey, would you like to review the FLP02 nostalgic 90s era case? I said, yes, please. And they said, would you like us to include a power supply? We have this new 1,000-watt power supply. Wow, 1,000 watts is more than we need, but yeah, please send it along. And they said, we're going to throw a cooler in there too. And I said, well, I don't need a cooler, but if you want to throw it in, maybe I'll use it on something. So they did, and they sent it to me. And I thought, you know, I'll set the cooler aside. I didn't really think much of it. That's what this box is right here. So it wasn't until earlier today that I'm wanting to put the specs together for this, make sure this cooler is going to fit in the case. We have a 9950 X3D chip on here, which is one of the highest end chips you can buy from AMD on the consumer side of things. And it can be very difficult to cool that chip, which is why, you know, I just went with a liquid cooler. And because this was already attached to the board, I was being lazy by not removing it and getting rid of it. So I thought, well, let's try this cooler from Silverstone. This is an air tower cooler. And it's kind of in a generic box. It doesn't really tell you much about it. So I start looking at it today. This is a $200 air cooler designed for servers. So it should be more than adequate to keep our system cool. My concern is, will it be loud? This is an industrial server designed cooler. That's why it's so much money. And it's supposed to fit on modern day, you know, consumer Intel and AMD sockets. And normally, with most computers today, they're glass panels. This is really nothing special to look at. It's a big silver cooler. It's not ugly, but it's not flashy. Well, this is the perfect scenario, because not only is the Silverstone power supply very impressive with how smooth all of the cables click into place. There's no struggle. Plenty of cabling, extra modular cables for items we don't have any plans to put in, but if we do in the future, we're ready. And I don't know how Silverstone knew I was going to be unhappy with this build, because they didn't know what I was going to do with it, but had the foresight enough to say, let us send you the cooler, no pressure, you can do a separate build, whatever you want to do, we're good with it. Okay. And I'm just thinking they sent me a $50 cooler. Boy, was I wrong. This is designed for servers. This is designed for like 4-unit height servers, which are about as big as they get without going custom or storage. If you look at a rack in like a data center, the servers are about yay big, and that's called 1 unit. So a 2U server is 2 units wide. That's the number of shelves. Each shelf is a unit, and those shelves are about this far apart, this wide. So a 4U server would probably be about this tall. It's a flat box that would slide in to the rack. Now they do make 12-unit inside, but those are usually custom. That's not common. And this is designed to go into a 4U server. So I thought, wow. So my only concern at this point, my initial concern was, and you know, before I looked it up, was will it be able to cool this chip? Well, if it's cooling down server chips, it's probably going to be fine. My second concern that remains right now that you and I are going to find out together today is it loud? Because when I see the word industrial, I think noisy. So I hope it's not noisy. So that's my only concern, and hopefully it fits in the case okay. I'm assuming they wouldn't have sent it to me with the case if it didn't fit in there. But I'm not doing the research. I could easily look this up, but I think it'd be more interesting to just do it and see what happens. So with that, let me say hello to everybody. Again, today is Tuesday, February the 10th, 2026. My name is CareyHolzman, and today, once again, we are looking at the SilverStone FLP02 nostalgic case from inspired by the 1990s and very accurate. I can say so because I was there building computers in the 90s and using this new cooler they sent along, which, you know, thankfully they sent it because now we have an opportunity to check it out. The XED120S. So again, you know it's for a server when it starts with a number followed by the letter U. They're referring to the thickness or the height of the server in a rack. A rack, not the country Iraq. It's a high-performance CPU cooler with a 240-watt TDP, and they say it's for mainstream AMD and Intel processor sockets. Total height of 145 millimeters right here, fully compatible with most 4U rack mount chassis. It's got 6.06 millimeter heat pipes, enhanced heat dissipation with front-to-back airflow, and VRM cooling. Includes a 120 by 30 millimeter PWM ball bearing fan. That's good. Metal fan mounting bracket, and it's compatible with Intel and AMD sockets. So Intel 1851 and 1700, that's going to be your 12th gen and newer. And also AMD socket AM5 and AM4. Those are your two main AMD sockets. And I'm looking at this, and you can see the fan is sandwiched there in the middle. Like I say, it's not ugly, but it's not something that you would necessarily want to put on a case that has a clear window. On the other hand, you're probably the only one seeing it if it's in your home. And if you're a business, it wouldn't make any sense to be showing off the parts. You want it to work well. So it is, there's more dimensions and weight, and the manual is here. And I'm very hopeful that this is going to once and for all solve all of my headaches that I've had with this build and the poor decisions I made using Thermaltake products. So here's hoping SilverStone saves the day. It is also available on Amazon, and as I mentioned, it's about, depending on where you look on Amazon, about the cheapest price I can find is $170 and change. I've seen some sellers offering this around $240. So it's not an inexpensive cooler, but if you see that it's industrial, right? You see that this is designed for Threadripper, and it's here's the Threadripper, the TR4, the SWRX8, SWRX9, which many of you probably never even heard of before. Those are server sockets, and servers can be quite loud. It's quite often a requirement to put ear protection on before going into a server room. So we're about to find out that this will fit in this case. We know it'll fit on the socket. Okay, that's resolved. But will it be silent operation, and will it keep the chip cool? That's our mission today, as well as taking out the cooler that's in there and throwing it into the trash can. I don't even think that should be recycled. That Thermaltake cooler is so terrible. I just think at some point you just throw out the trash can. I'm being a little facetious, but honestly, I'm so disgusted. I'm so upset, and I've wasted so much time and so much money. I never want to see it again, ever in my life. I don't want it to come back to haunt me as a recycled anything. Let it sit in a landfill and rot so it never again haunts my presence. Tell us how you really feel. And hello, everyone joining us here. Again, appreciate your attendance on a kind of a last-minute announcement for today's show. But Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Thursday shows can often be last minute. They're typically not scheduled that far in advance, given what's going on in the industry right now. Everything is really slowed down. So it's not just me, it's the whole industry. Mark Baggett says hello. Mark Gaines renews membership, now a member for 45 months, saying hello in the chat. Welcome in, Mark. Our friend Buster sends an Amazon gift card in lieu of Super Chat, as always. Thank you, Buster. Thomas MacT says hello. Ben Laird joining us. Nicholas Barlow joining us. David Graham says hello in our chat room. Andy W6AD joining us, as well as Thomas Robinson and Ron Mercura. There's TJ Wolf saying, yeah, I have the same liquid cooler. Oh, I have the same issue with a Cooler Master liquid water cooler. So many wires and RGB nonsense. Well, when you add the buzzing sound, the gurgling, popping sound coming out of the pump, there's definitely air in the system, and there doesn't appear to be any way to bleed it, and I wouldn't care if there was. I'm so disgusted by the whole thing. So if I haven't emphasized that enough. RKAJTN says hello, and Johnny Cash says hello from Spain. Glad to see you found a rugged air cooler. Well, I didn't find it. I mean, credit to SilverStone. You know, I didn't ask them. They offered. I'm like, okay. I'm honestly thinking maybe someday I could use it. I didn't know someday would be so soon, and I'm so grateful to SilverStone for sending it. Thomas Robinson with a £3 super chat. Thank you, Thomas. There's Abdul Azim Patel saying that all-in-one cooler just may cruise if Carey replacing it with an air cooler. Just may cruise. Just what? No, I don't understand. All the 12U I have seen are dish shells. That's Terrell. Yeah, basically a 12-unit thick or height rack-mounted system is usually all just like hard drives, and those are usually pretty customized. They're about 4U is as big as a typical server gets, but storage arrays, those can be customized to any size, really. Let's see. Jonathan Fell says hello, and Paul Vircher joining us. Robert Cronin saying hello, along with John Williams. And I think that catches us up. David Graham mentions I could change the fan out on this if it's too loud and put a quiet fan on it. So I'm a big believer that if you're going to buy something new, you should not have to modify it. If you have to modify something brand new, if I have to bleed the air out of an all-in-one cooler, unacceptable. It's broken. The whole reason I would buy something new is so that I can take it out of the package and use it. If I want to make something on my own, I'm fully capable of it. It's not like I don't know how. I want to get things done. I might be able to cobble together all kinds of pieces and parts around here and spend 5 hours to save $100. But 5 hours of my time is closer to $1,000. So, you know, if that was billable to a client at, let's say, $125 an hour, what, $750, something like that. So if you have a lot more time than you have money, have fun. But I also have to warranty what I do. And if I put a different manufacturer's fan in there and a cooler, what many of you seem to keep forgetting is I'm selling computers to customers that are holding me accountable for any warranty or support. So if I start having to customize things, I lose potentially warranty status, number one. I overcomplicate my warranty status if the fan is under one warranty and the heatsink's under another one. Not like you need to, I don't know, have warranty a heatsink, but it's just a general rule overall. I need to be able to have the confidence when a customer gives me their hard-earned money that they're getting a brand new, never before used product that has been installed correctly, is adequate for their needs, runs quietly, was in their budget, and that I can put my name behind and proudly say, CareyHolzman built this, CareyHolzman picked these parts. So if anything goes wrong, it looks like CareyHolzman is the one to blame for choosing bad parts, not installing them correctly, or, you know, if something were to happen, it's CareyHolzman who's got to pay to fix it. So with the little profit I make, it doesn't take much but one warranty call for me to break even, and another warranty call after that, and I'm losing money. So if you're sitting at home and you're just building for yourself, nobody cares. You can spend all the time you want. You can make your own little cooler. You can take things out of the trash can. You can do whatever you want to build your own system, because you're the one that you're going to call, and you're the one that is only going to be the one affected. Your reputation isn't on the line. You're not responsible for somebody else. If you decide, for example, that you want to stitch up your own wound, nobody's stopping you. But if you get an infection and you continue to treat that yourself with whatever you've got laying around the house, and now it's gangrenous and you have to amputate in order to save your body, there's nobody to blame but you for that. If a medical professional that you paid did the same work, there would be litigation and consequences. And that's a big difference between, if you cook for yourself and you get food poisoning, that's probably your fault. Okay? If you picked mushrooms out of the ground and, you know, decided to cook them and eat them, and now you or your relatives have died, that's your liability. But if you went to a restaurant and that was served to you, that's a whole different ball of wax. And I really appreciate it if you guys do keep in mind, my YouTube channel explains the business. This isn't an enthusiast channel. Enthusiasts can go do whatever they want to do. It doesn't have to make sense. It doesn't have to be of value. It doesn't have to look good. It doesn't have to run a long time, and you'll likely never see it again. You'll never know the long-term consequences of owning that system that was shoddily and haphazardly put together. These junkyard builds they do for fun. You think I would ever do a junkyard build and sell that to anybody? Seriously? What would I be doing to my reputation in the real business world to say I sell builds that were assembled out of a junkyard? That's humiliating and disgraceful. But for a home user to do that, it's celebratory and fun. But they're the only ones living with it. So whatever consequences that result over time that make the system, you know, unreliable or a security risk or whatever the consequences may be, we'll never know. It's a secret. Only the content creator knows in that situation, and they're likely going to keep it from you, because why would they brag about it, right? They move on to other things, that's all but forgotten, but they're the ones that have to live with it. So if this fan isn't good enough, I wouldn't replace the fan. No, I would replace the entire cooler and do it right. But if you're a home user and you want to do that, you have a freedom of lack of any, you're not answering to anybody. Nobody's holding you under a spotlight and holding you accountable for your decisions. It only affects you, your money, your inconvenience, your time. So, you know, do what you want. But when you pay for a service, whether it's a meal or a mechanic or a doctor, there is a certain reassurance you're getting when you pay for it. They're not doing you a favor. You're engaging in a business transaction. And if you're not getting what was advertised as being reliable, as being, you know, a different price than what they quoted you, or if they don't come out and take care of things, or in this case, you bring your car to the mechanic because something they did broke and you need them to redo it, that's going to come out of the mechanic's pocket. If not, you've got a real serious lawsuit that you can take them to court for. That would be very legitimate. But I don't think you'll be taking yourself to court. You understand? So do keep that in mind, please, that what I'm showing you is intended to be good enough to be sold to a customer, and for a customer to be so impressed with it, they'd want to tell their friends about me, and they'd want to order more from me in the future. That's my goal, not what can I get away with. I realize I'm pretty unusual here on YouTube that I'm showing you the business side. Most YouTube content in this regard is all enthusiasts. So it's very easy to get brainwashed into thinking there's not another side to this. And that's why I do this, is to remind everybody, if you really enjoy this a lot, wouldn't you like to get paid to do it? Wouldn't that be even better than spending your own money on your hobby, but to get paid to do the thing you love? That's why I do it. I love doing it, and they pay me to do it. So enthusiasts don't get paid to do their work. It's a hobby. You spend money on your hobby. You don't make money. That's the difference between a hobby and a job. A job earns you money. A hobby, you spend money. That's it. And that's defined by the Internal Revenue Service. So there you go. If you have a business you're running and it loses money, I think for 3 years, the IRS will say that's no longer a job, that's a hobby. So the business deductions no longer apply. I can't remember, I'm not a tax professional, but there's a certain number of years that if your business continually loses money, the IRS claims that you are running a hobby. And hobbies don't get deductions. Okay, so with that, there's Luke Greenia joining us and saying hello, John Stackhouse. Where's my location? We're in Phoenix. We've always been in Phoenix. Yeah. So it's almost 2 o'clock here in the afternoon in Phoenix. Oh, we're reminded it's Patch Tuesday today. Is it already the second Tuesday? Wow. Well, appreciate the reminder. David Graham says, I think all-in-ones are a waste of money. Well, I mean, sometimes you need an all-in-one. If you have a really super high-end cooler, super high-end CPU, and it gets really, really hot, you may have no choice but to put an all-in-one cooler in there. It doesn't have to be RGB, but that was the logic here, was even on the original case we were building this in, the little Thermaltake case, it didn't have a case window. But I felt like a 9950 X3D would take a cooler so big, an air cooler, that it wouldn't fit in that tiny case. The only thing that will fit to cool something that powerful is a liquid cooler. To the best of my knowledge, there's no other way to cool it. But since we've removed the motherboard out of that case, we now have a bigger case, and now an air cooler is possible. So I would debate with you that an all-in-one cooler is necessary. I just don't think you've ever had a system, that would be my guess, that was so high-end that you found yourself in that position. There's usually large air coolers you can buy that can replace an all-in-one cooler, assuming your case can accommodate a cooler that big. And so the other benefit of having an all-in-one is the smaller or tighter the case is and the higher end the CPU is, those lines cross, and then you don't have a choice. So, I mean, I suppose you could underclock the CPU, but then you could have just saved money and bought a cheaper CPU and not been in that position, which would have saved you money. But, you know, a lot of different ways that we can see things. We can choose to see things one way, but I'm here to remind you you should always be asking yourself, what's the flip side? If you think an all-in-one is a waste of money, is there another reason people buy all-in-ones besides the looks? And the answer is yes. There's a very valid reason, because that's why all-in-ones originally became a thing. They later kind of lost their way with all the RGB and screens and stuff, but that's not what they had originally. And they came out for a reason, and they were solving a problem that air coolers could not solve in certain cases where these giant air coolers wouldn't fit. And also they're more visually appealing as more and more cases have a glass window. People are going for an aesthetic. So not only does it cool better, it looks a lot better. And that, to a home user, could be the first thing on their priority list over security, over reliability, and it doesn't even matter how much it costs. All that matters is, does it look cool? It's a very opposite type of attitude than you get from businesses that need to order 10 or 100 or 1,000 computers. They don't care about that stuff. They're ordering in a big scale, and they want it reliable, and they don't care what it, you know, that it's putting on an RGB show, and they don't want to pay an IT department, and they don't want to scale up. Even an extra $10 times 1,000 computers adds up to be a lot of money on the IT budget. So the business side of things is where everything gets done. What's left over is what the consumers get offered. And so if I was eating a steak and I was throwing the gristle to the dog, and the dog says, this is the best gristle I've ever had. Not that dogs are the fussiest eaters, but the dog's getting the leftovers. I'm getting the good stuff. Why? Because I'm paying the bills. So if you are a business and you're buying, 1,000 computers, you're going to get computers that are better built, that don't have any nonsense, no RGB, no liquid coolers. You have an IT department that you need to minimize your costs on, and as a result, what businesses are getting is the prime cuts, and what consumers are getting is kind of the subprime cuts.
I still love that piece. You have email.
Thank you.
Love it.
A couple of things I learned about this computer. I did, the case rather, I pulled up the documentation to kind of figure out, you know, there's this little bracket in here, and I couldn't figure out what this bracket was for. The big bracket, that's obviously a graphics card support, but this little one, and I thought it went right about there. And I was sort of right. It goes the other way around inside, because if, I don't know how well you can see this, but this comes out right here. So if you want to put a 5 1/4 inch drive in there, because of how far this extends, the screws won't reach. So you would put this in, our cooler's in the way, but if the cooler wasn't there, we could install this and then put like our optical drive up there, and we would use this to secure the optical drive on this side of the case. It makes sense. The keys that are included are there to prevent you from turning the system off. I was saying it's there to keep the system from being turned on. It does work that way. However, if you remember on the ProArt build, there's a lock button that prevents the power button from being pressed. That's so nobody accidentally turns the computer off while you're using it. So what SilverStone has done is they've added the key, and what that does is it prevents the reset button from working and the power switch from working. So no one, let's say this is under your desk, you keep bumping it with your knee and you accidentally tap that and the machine shuts off on you. Or you accidentally reset it because you bumped into it. If that's happening, you can just turn the key and it locks out those buttons from functioning, so the system will not be powered off or reset through those buttons until you turn the key back the other way. It's a smart idea. The fans, the 2 fans up front and the fan in the back, they were already hooked up to the fan controller behind this. And what the turbo button does when you press it is it puts those 3 fans to full speed. So you do hear turbo. Like when you push turbo, you hear turbo. That's kind of a neat thing. I would never use it. And then the display when you press turbo says HH. And then when it's running, it seems to be, I'm not sure, but it looks like it's showing the RPM. So when I'm running this normally, you'll see the number 29, and sometimes it'll go to 30 and then back to 29. So I think it's 2900 RPM is what it's measuring on the fans, and then the fans are adjusting. So that number is active and changing, which is kind of cool. Visually, it's neat. And it does take me back to the 90s when we used to set those to the CPU speed and the CPU turbo speed. And those are just a few things I learned about the case as I was looking through the directions for things that weren't quite clear to me. So it was really nice that the fans were already, the fans that come with the case were already plugged into this fan controller. Plus there's room to add a couple more fans on there if you want to. And understanding the real reason for these keys, I mean, I would never use them, but I totally get it. And like I said, we have the same feature on the ProArt case that has a little slider that locks the power button from being pressed. And you're like, well, why is that? And it's like, you know, so you don't accidentally, you know, set something on top of the case, because the ProArt, the power button's on top. So if you don't, you know, set something on it and accidentally press the button, and then your system shuts off and you're lost, or at least interrupted in all the work you were doing. So this is more of a business class design, because back when these were being built, there were more businesses that bought computers. It was pretty unusual. Consumers were buying computers prior to 1995. Just so you know, in the late 1980s and early 1990s, probably 95% of all computer sales were going to businesses. 5% were going to an enthusiast community. When I got my first computer, friends and family members said to me, and I'm not making this up, they said, "You have a computer? Why would you have a computer in your house?" Like, it thoroughly flummoxed. Why would, are you nuts? They didn't ask that, but the look on their face was just, it'd be like, you have a forklift in your driveway at your house in a residential neighborhood? That belongs in a warehouse. Why would you have a forklift? So this is how much times have changed, and especially because of the internet. Once the services like the internet became publicly available, you know, outside of schools and research institutes, it was still a pretty difficult thing to learn how to use. So people were using CompuServe and AOL and Prodigy and, you know, those kind of things for the first couple of years, and eventually got weaned over to the internet with dial-up access and WinSocks that had to be configured and all of the fun stuff that went along with dial-up modems, et cetera, et cetera. Then when high-speed internet came out, probably around the end of the 90s, early 2000s with DSL, that's when things really ramped up on the consumer side of computer production, sales to consumers, I mean to say. And it kind of ramped up for the next 20 years. Then it starts going back down again with the advent of the smartphone. A lot of consumers, you've taken away so much of the complexity of Windows with an Android or an iPhone. And essentially, for most consumers, that's all they need. Businesses, on the other hand, still to this day need computers. That stays true no matter what. So it looks like we're getting back to a time not too far from now where somebody's going to come over my house and say, why do you have a computer in your house? Why wouldn't you just use your phone like everybody else? So it's interesting to watch it come around and go full circle, and it's done it in like 30 years. Well, we're not there yet. Maybe give it another 10 years, and I won't be surprised at people being like, you must work from home because that only somebody that's working would have a computer. You watch, that's where it's headed. It's going to go right back to where it started from. But the business has always been consistent. Business is always number one. When business needs RAM, you don't get any. When business needs storage, you don't get it. When business needs GPUs, you don't get one. When business isn't needing as many, then they'll sell it to you as a consumer. That's the market, because the businesses are the ones spending millions and millions and millions of dollars, and the consumers are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars overall. So there is a market for the consumers. It's a profitable one, but it's this big, and the business market is so big, it's a David and Goliath thing. And that's what's happening with RAM and storage and GPUs right now. So it has nothing to do with the tariffs or anything. It has to do with AI and the need for these companies to scale up. If you think about a fast food restaurant, do you have any idea how many McDonald's restaurants there are? When McDonald's is buying beef or they're buying potatoes, they affect the entire beef and potato market because they buy so much of it. And they don't buy it today because they need it tomorrow. They're paying for it now for what they need 6 months or 12 months from now. It's big, big money, and it's guaranteeing a supply. Can you imagine if they said, sorry, we don't have any beef to sell you today? What does McDonald's do? Just say, well, sorry, we'll just close the restaurant? Fortunately, we're not having a shortage of cattle. But let's say we did. Let's say there was a cattle shortage. McDonald's is going to get the beef before you will. And if there's anything left over, that's what they'll sell you. Business comes first when you're in a marketplace that's designed the way that capitalism is designed. Do you, as a beef seller, want to sell one cow to a butcher at a grocery store once a week, or would you rather sell the equivalent of 1,000 cows every month? As a business owner, it's a pretty obvious thing to decide. That's just the way it works. It doesn't have to be fair. No one ever promised fairness, but it also isn't owed to you. No one owes you that. Nobody's stopping you from going out and doing it yourself. You can raise your own cattle. You know what I'm saying? In much the same way, you can start your own RAM company too. Many companies were founded by people that found investors and didn't use any money of their own. They're good salesmen with a good business idea. And that's how do you think these companies got started? Do people ever stop and think, why does Corsair exist? Why does Micron exist? The government didn't create them. One individual started with an idea. Apple Computer started with an idea in a garage with two guys. Now it's worth a lot of money. Ford had an idea for a very inexpensive car made very cheaply so the average person can afford it. And look to all the industries that rely on cars and transportation of getting goods, deliveries, all of that, road construction, simply because one man had an idea. And it wasn't his only idea. Ford had 3 other ideas that he filed bankruptcy on. I think he owned a flooring store or something, tile something. And he would just, file the bankruptcy, dust himself up, get up and go back at it again. And he didn't stop with a car. He's responsible for charcoal and essentially barbecuing, which is a big American thing. It really wasn't until Ford said, I got all this sawdust left over from car manufacturing because they used a lot of wood, and it's costing me all this money to remove all this sawdust, which is like 182 tons a year or something. I don't know what it was. But this guy that he was working with, Kingsford, you ever heard of Kingsford charcoal? There's a really interesting history there, and nobody talks about it. So it's not like it's one guy with one idea. A lot of people that start their ideas, they have a lot of ideas. It could be rocket ships and electric cars, or it could be selling books and then providing server services and launching rockets like Jeff Bezos. It could be starting an airline and a record company, and then you're Richard Branson. What you'll find is the individuals that do this don't usually stop at one idea. So it's interesting when you look at the history of where all of this started. Pick anything, even Silverstone, starts with one person, and typically that one person is getting a lot of resistance with people saying you can't do it. So if you're telling me you can't do it because you don't have the means, then you've allowed the world around you to manipulate and brainwash you. And thankfully, for the people who do go forward, there's a lot of money to be made because so many people won't do it. They've already quit before they began. But for those few who do it anyway, and they succeed, there are riches beyond belief. So they don't have anything any different than you have, other than perhaps a different attitude. And just because they did it doesn't mean they're going to succeed. But just because they failed doesn't mean they're done. They just start over again in most cases. Try again, try again, try again. Try it differently. Don't do the same thing. Those are your real business, what's the word? These are people that change the world. And if you look at a lot of successful people, Rick Springfield was told he can't sing, he can't act, and he can't write. So he started singing, acting, and writing. And he just tried to get better and tried to get better and tried to do it in a different way until he found something that worked. He still performs today. So, you've got to be able to believe in yourself, and you've got to be able to believe that nobody owes you anything in this world. You are free to sit back and be a consumer and watch life pass you by, and that's your whole life. You're here and you're gone as just a consumer. Or you're free to add to society in your own way that you feel is important, whatever that means. And usually it's something out of necessity. Something in life you're like, this is a pain, I wish it could be easier. There's a guy, just to give you one more example, there's a guy who invented a portable car wash machine. So instead of driving your car to the car wash, he's got a machine with a big brush on it, and he brings it out to you. I guess I don't know if it's got a tank on it or if it hooks up to a hose, I don't know. But it goes around the car and washes it just like it would at a car wash, but instead of the car going through the car wash goes around the car. It's just a convenience. And somebody just said, why do I have to wait in this line of cars? Like if there's no cars at the car wash, you just drive in, who cares? But if there's a big line, as there often is, and you're sitting there waiting for your turn to go through the car wash, and you're thinking, this has got to be an easier way than this, something more efficient. And that's how these ideas happen. So if somebody's tired of the RAM shortages, they'll get off their butt and they'll do something about it. Our world doesn't have so many things that you don't even know you don't have because somebody couldn't be bothered to get up and do it. They had the idea, but they didn't act on it. And it may never come to fruition. They may have been the only one in the planet at that time that had that idea. Pringles, the can of potato chips? That's one guy's idea that he fought and spent millions of dollars on research over the course of many years. When the board of directors said, you're wasting your time and you're wasting your money, this is a terrible idea. And this one guy said, it isn't a terrible idea. I'm in charge, and you're going to do what I tell you to. And now we have Pringles, one of the most recognized chip brands around the world. It didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't easy. But it wasn't like he stumbled upon it one day. He just said, I want a potato chip that won't be broken in the package, that'll stay fresh, because back then they were just putting things in wax paper bags, you know, not like what we have today. And I want a scientist to design a shape for a potato chip that would prevent breakage and will stay fresh in the package. And so they came up with the can from the idea from tennis balls, right? You open a tennis ball can. Do you ever think a Pringles can look like a tennis ball can? That's not coincidence. And then there was a war, World War II, I believe. Is it World War II? And the president of the company was asked by the president of the United States to be the Secretary of Defense during the war. So he left his position at Procter & Gamble, then came back 2 years later to find that the people in charge canceled his Pringle chip thing. His whole lab was shut down. And he's like, start the lab back up. And they're like, no, we spent too much time and money on this stupid idea. And he goes, start the lab back up and get back to work. So that delay of the war stopped all that from advancing further. Finally, he had this vision in his head where the scientists came up with the shape that won't break. It's like a saddle. And if it's in the can, it doesn't break. And it's unique. It's very easy to ship it. And they're some of the most expensive potato chips you can buy, or crisps that you can buy. But they have a fanciness to them, right? It kind of feels special when at least it does to me. And the chips typically arrive, they're not broken, they're all the same shape, yada, yada, yada. They're also not all potato. They're like 42% potato. But that's not the point. If that guy wasn't so stubborn and visualizing and making this happen, we wouldn't have Pringles today. Now, is that the end of the world? No. But the point that I'm trying to make is, how many things do we not have today that are beyond your possible imagination, simply because somebody gave up or somebody never tried? It's just something to think about. Life could be so much more interesting. So when it comes to RAM shortages and solid state drive shortages, all these companies all have one thing in common. They weren't started by a conglomerate or a corporation. They were started by typically one person with an idea. And they started small, and they grew their financing, and they got investors. Maybe they were even bought out. And there you go. So I hope you see that as inspiration. Andy said Pringles are ground up and reformed, not sliced like real potato chips. That's right, because potato chips are all a different shape. Every potato is a different shape. So if you want to sell a bag of potato chips and you want them to arrive unbroken, you're not starting with every potato chip being the same. Every potato is different, so every potato chip is cut differently. No two chips come out alike. So if you want to control the breakage, you have to control the shape of the potato chip. And you can't do that with a potato. You have to sort of dehydrate it and reconstitute it. And when you reconstitute it, you have to add binders, and then you lose all of its flavor, so then you have to add flavoring. And then when you're going to redesign it, you think, well, what scientifically is the best possible shape that would avoid any breakage? And it turns out it's like a saddle shape. And look at how successful the brand is. And what ended up happening is they started, when they promoted Pringles, they said it was Pringles' newfangled potato chips. And then I think Frito-Lay got upset by that and said, these aren't potato chips. And they won that lawsuit, that they're not potato chips. So they said to the guy at Procter & Gamble, I think the guy's name was McElroy, they said, how do you want to, what do we do now? And they said, well, just call them Pringles. You don't have to call them anything other than Pringles. People know what they are. We don't have to say that they're potato chips. Just take the word potato chip off the package. Now, today in the United States, they're called potato crisps. But he was right. Just saying Pringles, everybody knows what you're talking about. It's a Very popular brand. And in fact, the guy who invented the can that the Pringles are put into, that famous Pringles can, asked his kids to put his ashes in a Pringles can. He was so proud of his idea that he was buried with some of his ashes in a Pringle can that was put at his gravesite, that buried with him. Google it. It's a fascinating history over something you might just not think about Pringles. But the guy fought for years and spent millions of dollars to make that a reality. He manifested it out of nothing. Despite even the people in the company, the board of directors, telling him no, he said, I don't care what you think. I'm in charge. I'm the president of the company. This is my decision. I don't care if you like it or not. That's ballsy. And that's what it takes to get change done in the world. We can learn lessons from those who are successful, and we can learn lessons from those who aren't, but we don't normally talk about the ones that aren't successful. It's a fascinating story. David Graham says, now I have a Pringles craving. Thanks. I wonder what flavor the can was. I think the original Pringles were, I think they came out originally with 4 flavors, I thought. Like just regular plain, probably barbecue. I can't remember. I'm sure there's a Wikipedia on it somewhere. And now, because Pringles are so flavorless when they come out of the oven, you can make them any flavor you want, kind of like ramen. They don't have any flavor of their own, which means that you can easily customize them to regional preferences and cultures. So when they sell them in other countries, they'll have flavors in other countries of Pringles that we don't get here in America, like cocktail prawn. You know, to me that's weird, but to somebody in England or maybe somebody in Asia, that may be their #1 seller. So the number of Pringles, number of different flavors of Pringles is astronomical because there's no limit to how you can flavor them. You have a perfect base to flavor it for any region at any time, and without having to retool a factory. It's a very simple process to change the flavor, very inexpensive. Change the packaging to represent it, ship it out. It's a damn good idea. Yeah, it's not natural. It's not processed. It is a processed food, right? But it changed the definition of what a crunchy potato snack could be. And it wasn't by mistake. It was an idea that was fought for and fought for and fought for, and even the person in charge doesn't get a free pass. Even they have to fight with all the other people in the company going against it. It's not easy, but if you've got what it takes, you can change the world. And if you look around at the items that are around you, something so ubiquitous as Pringles and so simple, and you find out what it took to get that onto the shelves, you'll have a whole new respect for just that one product. And then when you see thousands of products on the shelves and each one has a backstory. Frozen vegetables by Birdseye. That guy had an idea before people had freezers. He was well ahead of his time. He's got an idea. He can flash freeze food so it doesn't taste terrible when you reheat it. But he's got no way to transport it because most Americans don't have electricity, let alone refrigerators, nor do the trucks. So he was well ahead of his time. He had frozen food, but he had no way to get it to people. How much would that suck? And he just had to hang out long enough for the technology to catch up. And then people started buying freezers. It became an affordable thing. And, at this point, he'd been in business like 10 years just selling locally. But now suddenly you could have refrigerated transportation on trains and trucks. It's an incredible backstory, everything from the popsicle to ice cream. People used to get sick from eating ice cream. It just wasn't healthy. It was laced with bacteria. It was poorly handled. And how the guy who started Good Humor what he did and how he took the refrigerator, which needs a motor, and went to Henry Ford and said, can you build me some custom vehicles to take the ice cream to the people and keep it frozen? And then hence the ice cream truck was born. Anyway, it's and the good humor, it's all white. It's a white truck, and the good humor people that would run the trucks, they all wore white because white is a sign of cleanliness and purity. That implied that this was a safe product. You're not going to get sick eating this dairy product that quite often was making people sick. And we're not talking a history that's that long ago. We're talking less than 100 years ago. And look at how far things have come. Heck, just even going to a grocery store 100 years ago was pretty rare. And today, you know, where else would you go? So somebody had the idea to start a grocery store. Probably was told he was an idiot. He did it anyway. And now everywhere you look. All right. So I hope you find those stories inspiring. And if you want to learn more, Google is your friend. YouTube, there's a lot of documentaries. If you want to know about the history of any successful company, just Google it. And there are video documentaries on the History Channel that will go through individual products. The Foods That Built America is one I highly recommend. And I think they've got 6 seasons of episodes. And then The Brands That Built America is a spin-off where it's about like Levi's and Coca-Cola and all these other companies that there always seems to be 2 competitors, Coke and Pepsi, or Ford and GM, or you know what I'm saying? Like there's always like these 2 battles, Post and Kellogg's, Edison versus Tesla, RCA versus Farnsworth. Yeah, to find out what it took to get a TV and what RCA underhandedly did to stop this poor kid from who actually invented it from being able to market it and sell it. Some nasty work there, but it's fascinating to see how this all started and how we got to where we are. Because what you can learn from that is that's the process you should expect if you want to endure that and change the world. And it's not like we're naming 2 or 3 people. It's thousands of people. Every product you see on a shelf, there's a story behind it, including the store you're shopping at and the car you're driving and the fuel you're putting in your car. There's a story behind every one of those businesses. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is pull this cooler out and never ever see it again for the rest of my life. Oh man, I really tortured myself on this one, didn't I? I guess the first thing I'll do is just take the block off of here. So you're not going to get much of an angle there because I have to see what I'm doing, but I'm just going to remove the radiator. Okay, now I should be able to get the block out. But before I do that, let me go ahead and unscrew the block as well. So the radiator's out. Let's get the block out. And I'm going to need to get a paper towel and wipe up this thermal compound because it's going to get all over everything if I don't do that right now. So I'm going to step away from the camera for just a second and go grab a paper towel. I was not properly prepared. Shame on me. I knew this was coming. So we'll grab a paper towel here. And I'm not worried about so much as, you know, getting out Q-tip and rubbing alcohol at this point. I just want the bulk of that thermal material taken off. So you don't need to go at it with a solvent and a Q-tip. Just a good old-fashioned paper towel and clean it up like you would any other kind of a mess. Looks like I was pretty generous with this thermal compound here. So my main concern right now is just getting the thermal compound off of the block. And then I'll worry about getting it off of the CPU after the radiator and block have been removed and I have a little more free room in there to move. So the reason I'm cleaning it is as I'm taking it out, if I'm tilting it certain ways and it starts rubbing up against components in the case, it'll transfer that thermal compound very easily onto whatever it touches. And that stuff can be hard to wipe off. It often smears. So that's a little frustrating too. But let me see if I can remove this now. I think I still have some things plugged in that I haven't unplugged yet, but let's see how far I get. So there's our radiator. It does look like there's some kind of a filler cap that I could bleed the air out of it, but I'd still have to refill it with something. And then the question is, refill it with what? You don't want to mix different coolant systems because it could go against the bushings and everything. That could deteriorate them faster. And they didn't give us any extra. So once again, as a brand new cooler shouldn't require you to do any of that anyway. And that's where I'd say just return the damn thing because that's unacceptable. Where is this going? So I've got the pump plugged into what's got to be an ARGB header here. Time to just start unplugging all this ARGB nonsense. Modern coolers today from other brands like Lee and Corsair, for example, will have magnets on the side of the fan that will transfer the power and the RGB signal to the next fan, so you don't need any additional cables. You just, one fan needs the cable, and that fan just passes it on to the next fan and the next fan and the next fan until as many fans as you need have it. It's a much smarter design. It's a lot less cable management. It's a lot less work. But you can see all of these cables for just a fan is preposterous. Now, 10 years ago, this might have been the way things were, but it doesn't need to be this way today. It's kind of frozen in time with the technology they're using here. So there's our two fans. I also mistakenly thought that this case is so big it would hold a 420 millimeter cooler. And when I was reading the directions, it said, no, 360 is as big as it'll take. On the 120 millimeter fans, you could have 3 of them for a total of 360 millimeters. And on the 140s, the biggest you can have is a 280. So we actually put the biggest radiator in that is the using the 140 millimeter fans. Just got lucky that way. I assumed we could go one more fan. It says, no, it's not going to fit. So, you know, well, granted, that information was always there, but I like to do these builds live and unscripted. And obviously, if I built 2 of these in a row, the second one would go a lot smoother, right? But then that kind of doesn't make it as interesting because you're kind of lying to your audience about your learning experience. Now, I suppose somebody could sit there and study it all. I could maybe go look at movie reviews before I go see a movie, but then I kind of know what to expect, and it may affect my movie-going experience, right? I might end up being bored because everything in the review kind of described the movie, or I might end up being disappointed before I even sat down, right? I might have already bought the ticket, then read the review and went, oh, this sounds terrible. And then I go to the movie and I still might enjoy it and think, well, that reviewer didn't know what they were talking about. So if I share these experiences with you, it's not for me to tell you what your experience will be. It's for me to share with you what my experience was live and unscripted. So it's genuine, it's real, it's unrehearsed. And things that are obvious and intuitive to me may not be to you, and vice versa. I might struggle with something and you see the answer very clearly and obviously, and it takes me forever to get to it. That is reality. I mean, look at all the cables. This cooler just has so many cables. More cables. Finally, we'll kick that to the curb. I never want to see it again, ever. Or these. I never want to see these again. If we want to go back 10 years and we want to do it that way, all these cables, this can go. This can go. Oh, we're still going. This can go. And in the motherboard box, there's a bunch of different mounting brackets and hardware for that cooler to fit on different Intel and AMD sockets. These little pieces and screws, all this can go. This is a massive amount of work just for a radiator. By today's standards, I cannot express to you. Unacceptable. It shouldn't even be on the market. Before the Fry's Electronics store closed up here in Phoenix, I went in there and I saw that they were still selling network hubs. A customer needed a new network switch. Well, you can just run over to Fry's and grab one back in the day. We run over to Fry's, we go into the networking section, and the first thing I grab is a small, what I thought was a switch. And I read the box just to make sure I got the right thing, and it's a network hub. Well, network hubs have been obsolete for over 20 years. And this was maybe 10 years ago. I don't know when it was, but it wasn't that long ago with regards to the fact that I can't imagine anyone in the world would be using a network hub anymore. I can't find any reason why anybody would do that, because network switches are far more efficient, they're overall faster, and they're actually cheaper to produce. So apparently Fry's Electronics had a lot of excess inventory. And I'd say it was 50-50. For every hub they had a switch. It wasn't like they just had a couple of hubs. Half of the wall was hubs and half of the wall was switches. And on the box, they all look alike. You've got to read the details to see which is which. And I was just, I couldn't believe it. I said, they're still selling hubs? They're obsolete. There's no excuse for this to exist. They're just trying to scrape the bottom of the barrel for their garbage. It should have gone into the trash can or back to the recycler, but they're selling it to customers that don't know any better. Well, that's what that cooler is to me. That cooler is an old, obsolete design, but it's being sold today. You got to wonder, that's got to be old inventory. Which also might explain the buzzing sound it's making. So just a ton of parts go with that one piece. Now, by getting that out of the system, we're going to have a much cleaner looking install. In fact, I can put this lid back on just for the fact that we don't have to get in from the top anymore, so just get it out of the way. I'll lay the system back down and then we'll take a look at this cooler and see if we can get that in there. Now, this does have the original AMD plastic retention clips on it, which I doubt this is going to use. But now I need to get this thermal compound off of the CPU. So again, I'm going to grab another paper towel. I might be able to use this one. I'm just afraid of getting it all over myself. Try to not be wasteful. Now, I will want to clean the top of the CPU off with a solvent like rubbing alcohol, high content alcohol, 91% or better. But I can at least use this to get the bulk of it, and then use the solvent and a Q-tip to get the residual, the remnants, final polishing, if you will. Terrell Cochran says he has a computer store that still has 10/100 megabit per second network interface cards on the shelf. Oof. Yeah, it just doesn't make any sense. Andy says, do coolers use distilled water or some other coolant? Typically, coolers will use a coolant very similar to antifreeze. What you want to do is you want to raise the boiling point so the water doesn't boil at such a low temperature. If the water in your engine, if you just put water in your engine, you will cause flash rust immediately. It'll flash rust the inside of the channels that the water runs through and the inside of the radiator. Flash rust isn't really dangerous. I mean, you could look at your disc brakes after a rainstorm and probably see their flash rust. But then the minute you use the brakes and it pushes down on the rotor, it rubs all that rust off. But over time, that rust gets worse and worse and will eat through the metals. So you don't want to use water. You don't want to use distilled water. You want to use a mixture of antifreeze and distilled water, because you don't want the what's the word I want? The minerals and such that are in regular water. You want to remove that because they can be corrosive and harm things like seals. So the antifreeze has a multiple purpose, which is to raise the boiling point of the water. I also think it reduces the freezing point, just like when you add salt and ice together. I'm not sure on that one. But that way, what's water boil at? 180 degrees Fahrenheit or something? I can't remember. 100 degrees Celsius. By adding antifreeze, you raise that boiling point. Now the water can get to 200, 250. I don't know what it is. Just make it up a number before it'll boil. So that way, if a car engine is supposed to run at around 190 degrees Fahrenheit, you've already exceeded the boiling point. If you just put distilled water in there, you're going to boil that water. It's going to come out as steam. It's not good. So any sort of a liquid cooler should not be using any sort of water. Maybe if you're trying to cool a fish tank with living creatures, that's a different story. But it's critically important. If you want to use a base of water, you have to add something to the water to raise its boiling point. And also it lubricates all the seals and everything throughout the channels and the motor that moves that fluid around, which regular distilled or plain water simply is too corrosive. Bill Stott said the boiling point of water is 212 degrees Fahrenheit. That sounds right. Thank you for that, Phil. I could have Googled it, but I can't remember. But you can imagine if a car engine typically runs between 190 and 210 degrees Fahrenheit when it's at its... The idea with a gas combustion engine is you want to bring that engine up to temperature quickly to get the best efficiency. So we want that engine to warm up very, very quickly, but then we don't want it to get any hotter than that. So you have a water pump. And then we keep using the word water. And I think that's where the industry needs to change and say it's liquid. It's a liquid cooler. There's liquid cooling in your engine. But it is about 50-50 of the coolant and the water together. But I think it's a misnomer to call it water cooling. It's liquid cooling. Antifreeze just lowers the freezing temp. No, antifreeze, see, this is where you and I are going to disagree. So I'm going to hit Google on this because I went to become, before I became a computer technician, I was at the GE school for ASE certified car auto mechanics. And one of the classes I took was internal engine combustion theory. And I was taught all this in academia. I was taught all the science of it. So what I'm telling you is coming from my own personal learning experience. And unlike computers and technology, antifreeze and car cooling hasn't changed. I mean, antifreeze has gotten scientifically better, but the idea of cooling the engine and the combustion engine, the basic four-stroke motor, hasn't changed for over 100 years. But if you look at, we'll just type, what does antifreeze do? I think it raises the boiling point first and foremost. That's your first concern. Whether or not it freezes, that's less of a concern. But let me just see. I think it does both. We'll just type in, what does antifreeze do? Antifreeze, or engine coolant, is a vital fluid mixture, usually a 50-50 mix of ethylene glycol and water, that regulates a vehicle's engine temperature across extreme conditions. It lowers the freezing point to prevent cracking in winter, because remember, water will expand when it freezes. I forgot about that. But it also raises, at the same time, the boiling point to prevent overheating in the summer, while also lubricating the water pump and preventing internal corrosion. So antifreeze does all of that. I just wasn't sure on the freezing part, but now that I remembered, yeah, that the water, when you freeze it, I mean, anybody that lives in a cold climate that's ever had frozen pipes burst on them, they can speak firsthand to how important it is to make sure that you keep the heat on in your house, at least to a minimal level, so in the wintertime your pipes don't freeze. But okay, let me, or at least the pipes don't freeze in the house. They can freeze outside. They can burst outside. You don't want them bursting in your walls. All right, let's get back to it. So again, we don't have to make sort of these claims and such. When we have Google available, we can double check ourselves before we make public statements that are inaccurate. I didn't want to get into it. I was just trying to relay a concept, and too often people will grab onto the concept, take us off of our subject matter, and now we've shifted onto something entirely different to resolve misinformation. When it was never intended to be a class on antifreeze, it was meant as an example for comparison with radiators. It wasn't meant to get into all the technical minutia of becoming an antifreeze engineer, and I apologize for that. I brought it on myself by even mentioning it. I don't know how else to explain it to you guys, and then we end up in the weeds. I really need you to go with me on this and try and stay on the subject matter, please. And if you have facts that you want to correct me with, please provide me with links to where you're getting that information. I'm more than happy to be corrected, but at the same time, that correction is if it's not related to what we're doing right now, it's frustrating, and people go, why are your videos so long? Why do you go off on these tangents? I didn't intend to. Somebody took it and ran with it, and I didn't want you to do that. So let's try and stick with this, and we can use Google and do our own research today to verify what we think we know. And again, if there's anything you want to correct me on, or if I've phrased something poorly, feel free to send me a link to that. I would appreciate it. All right, so let me grab my my Q-tip and my rubbing alcohol. Let's get that cleaned up and get this cooler installed. So what I have is a 99% alcohol. This is used for cleaning purposes. This is not meant to treat wounds. If you use this on yourself for medical, even external use, you're going to make yourself worse. Hospitals don't use this unless they're using it to clean medical equipment. They don't use this on people. If you want to use it on a cut or a burn, a laceration, you want to use something more in the 70% range. We used to use, you know, as much as things change, they stay the same. We used to use this to clean cassette deck heads. Same thing, Q-tip, same thing, high alcohol content. We used it to clean VCR heads. We used it to clean reel-to-reel tape deck heads. In electronics, this is very, very common and has been, well, as far as I know, forever. Like going back to I was first taught, and no matter how much the electronics have changed, the solvent and cleaning methods are the same. It's only the devices we're cleaning that have changed. Even laserdisc players, we would clean the lenses of laserdiscs with the same exact way we would clean a magnetic tape head. Yeah. And we're using that same way to just get the top of this internal heat shield free of any contaminants. And it's not really that critical to get it spotless, okay? It's not. If I didn't do this at all, if I simply wiped it off with a paper towel, put a fresh coating of thermal compound, you maybe might see a 1 degree Celsius of cooling difference, maybe. It's really hard to determine because the temperature of the room doesn't stay the same unless you have a controlled room, which I can assure you, none of you have that. I've never seen one in my life. But scientific labs that have the budgets to afford a temperature-controlled room where the temperature doesn't fluctuate can do those measurements. I think Gamers Nexus has one. They spend a lot of money for it. But the rest of us, you've got to know, even though you may not feel that slight temperature change in your room, it's constantly changing. And so whenever you're measuring temps, it's best if you do it over a course of a couple of days and do it at least 3 to 5 times, if not more, and build your average up. And you'll probably find the differences aren't what they appear to be initially. You've got to run multiple tests and average them out to figure out. You know, people on the internet, they'll try different thermal compounds, for example. Which thermal compound is the best? And they'll buy cheap thermal compounds and expensive thermal compounds. And then they'll run their temperature tests. But all throughout the testing, the room temperature is changing. And maybe they run the test 2 or 3 times on the same day. Try it a different day. And they, whatever the temperature was at the time, they go, well, this thermal compound cooled better. But on a different day, that thermal compound didn't. So you'd say, well, then how do you tell one good thermal compound from a bad thermal compound? The thermal compounds almost work universally the same with a margin of variance which is negligible, just a few degrees one way or the other. The same as your room temperature, they kind of negate each other. They cancel each other out. So there really isn't any measurable difference from one thermal compound to another in general. So why do they sell more expensive thermal compounds? The more expensive thermal compounds won't dry out, or at least that's the idea, as soon as the cheaper ones. If you're somebody who's constantly tinkering with your computer and you can't leave it alone, you're always upgrading, you're always tinkering, don't waste your money on expensive thermal compounds. If you're somebody that wants to get it done once and you don't want to have to open it again for 10 years, put a really good thermal compound on it. And there's a good chance that that thermal compound will stay moist and it won't dry out. That's it. That's your test. It has nothing to do with the cooling ability. That's where the internet enthusiasts have got it all wrong. They all completely miss it. I think Gamers Nexus has covered this, but it's very misleading to suggest that one thermal compound cools better than another, because even if it were true, it's not by more than 3 degrees Celsius. And that's assuming an extreme cooling of difference. It's really about how long does the thermal material take before it dries out. Cheaper thermal materials dry out sooner. That's it. That's all it is. It's not rocket science. It's not what people on the internet think it to be. And, you know, I imagine it's like a doctor or a lawyer watching a television show where the medical advice is terrible and this would never happen in reality. Or the lawyer is saying something that legally isn't true or wouldn't be upheld in a courtroom. That would never happen in reality. As a computer technician, I see this on enthusiast videos constantly, miscomprehended information. And then they take that and they educate their audience. And they're often more popular than I am. You have no idea the damage this is doing to our society's education. And I do what I can to make at least my audience aware of it. And that's all I can do. I'm David versus Goliath on this issue. It doesn't mean I'm going to ignore it, not talk about it. I'll tell my audience. So at least I know some of you out there know the difference. Let's see what we got in the box. Let's unbox this bad boy and see what's in here. Let me think, how do I want to do this? Let's just set this up. I'm just trying to give myself some more room is what I'm doing. And let's take all of this stuff here. Yeah, that's garbage. More cooler parts. Just set all this down on the floor just to get it out of my way. So that's all for the case. We'll need that stuff later. This too. That's all for the case. Okay, I think I'm ready. Now, we're unboxing the XED120S from SilverStone. And we have some tape. Should never cut towards yourself. Learned that in the Cub Scouts. Yet I did it anyway. Do as I say, not as I do. Here we go. Can I get a zoom in on this? So kind of a simple plain white box here. We've got some documentation right on top. And we're gonna, what looks like to be a fan, I'm gonna guess, inside of this box. And then our cooler right here. I find a lot of times the easiest way to get large items out of big boxes is to turn the box upside down and lift the box up away from the device instead of trying to pull the device out. Well, the cooler is not as big as it looks online. I'm a little bit relieved about that, if I'm honest. Don't get me wrong, it's not a small cooler, but it's definitely not that large either. It looks like a standard 2 radiator or 2 fin stack fan heatsink with the fan in the center. And I imagine that fan probably slides out. Looks like we've got a couple screws here. Again, I'm just sort of speculating. We have thermal compound pre-applied, covered by this plastic. That's to make sure that that stays uncontaminated from dust and fingerprints until you're ready to apply it to your CPU. We've got a fan cable here. Unfortunately, they've decided, because this is a server style cooler, they don't really care about color matching and black wires. So we got the old mustard and ketchup colors. Not a big deal, but this is kind of a sign of what you'd see in industry, not necessarily what you see on home computers. And a very long cable. This is something else you don't typically get with a consumer design. You typically get a cable that's maybe about that long on most coolers. But when you're in a server rack, especially like a 4-year server, this could have to run quite a distance to plug in on those. And if you're wondering why that's different, it's because it's universally accepted to use this in a consumer computer, a modern, socketed consumer computer, or a modern server. It does both. But at this price, it's probably not for your average consumer. There's our instruction manual, and then, I don't know, I thought there was a fan in here, but it looks like the fan's already on it. So this must be all of our mounting hardware. So we've got a back plate. This is likely for, I'm going to guess, Intel use. We've got our fan buckles. This is if you wanted to add another fan to either side, which I don't want to do, but again, on a server, you might want to do that. It will add these fan buckles. By adding another fan, you don't really reduce your temperature very much, maybe 2 or 3 degrees in most cases. So I would just avoid bringing in more dust and more noise and not use these. That's my personal preference. We've got some thumb screws. We've got some mounting brackets. Now these thumb screws here, these say specifically they're for AMD. These say they're for Intel. So you're only going to use one or the other. You will have parts left over regardless. So I can tell you right now, we don't need the Intel screws and we don't need these fan buckles. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this is only for Intel. This right here is only for Intel as well, because Intel sockets are completely square and AMD sockets are rectangular shaped. And this looks completely square to me, but I could be wrong. So what it looks like is we've got these brackets and these screws. So I'm going to guess on the install on this. On the motherboard, if we turn this around, we'll go back over to camera 1. There are these 4 screws holding in those plastic brackets that were holding on our liquid pump before. That's stock with an AMD motherboard, part of the motherboard. And behind it is a metal bracket, which you can see right there. That's why we don't need this bracket. It wouldn't fit anyway. So I'm pretty confident I'm right about this. So these are extra parts. So you say, okay, well then where do these screws go if that's the case? Well, what you'll do is you'll take these 4 screws out that are holding the plastic brackets in, and they're screwing in to this metal bracket back here. So you're going to take those screws with the little plastic brackets out. You're going to put these screws in, and then you're going to attach the brackets to those screws, and then you affix the cooler on top of the bracket. So it's very similar to many other coolers we've seen before, and pretty straightforward, pretty easy installs, what it looks like. So let me get to work. Ooh, I want to set it down like this so I can work with gravity, and we're going to get those brackets removed. Now, I strongly encourage you to hold on to these brackets so long as you have the motherboard, because these brackets are pretty well universal. All the AM5 brackets that come with an AM5 board will work on any AM5 board. Same with AM4. Any AM4 brackets will work on an AM4 board. So even if you don't need these brackets, you might end up with a system. Maybe you're building a new system, used parts, I don't know, changing a cooler out of a friend's system, and that new cooler requires those brackets. Some do. You can always go on Amazon and buy them, by the way. They're pretty available. They used to be hard to find, but now they're fairly available. And here's the other tip that I'm going to give you, and that is when you take these brackets out, only take out one side. Then put the screws back in to hold the bracket in place, because if you take out both sides, the back plate will just fall to the ground, and then you're going to have to hold the back plate with one hand while putting the screws in with the other hand. It's a pain in the butt. You're not saving any time. You're making it harder than it needs to be. So we're going to open up these, forget what they call these. They're not standoffs. It's probably got a name in the directions here. On one side has a thin thread and one side has a wider thread. I'm not quite sure which one we need, so I'll just try, see what goes in. And these are just going to go right back into those same holes. And it looks like the wide thread is what we want to go into that rear bracket. So I've got the thin thread on top, the wider, thicker thread on the bottom. Let me just verify that goes in the way I thought it did. That's right. So now those two things, those two, I gotta find the word for those. Those screw down, and you just, as tight as you can make them with your fingers. They don't have to be overly tightened. It's a lot of misinformation, again, on YouTube with that. You can over-tighten your cooler, especially on an AMD system. One of the common symptoms a builder will have is they'll have a regular AMD motherboard, and I see this so often. and they've got 4 sticks of RAM, and one or two of the RAM modules aren't being seen. They assume they've got bad RAM. You can imagine the anxiety and the time they invest to diagnose the RAM and move it around the different sockets. It's all a complete waste of time based on misinformation provided by enthusiasts online. What they've done is they've torqued their cooler down so tight it warped the motherboard, so it's sitting like this. And they can't see it. It's a warp you can see with a measuring tool, but it's not a warp you can really see with a human eye. So the board is warped, and I'm going to exaggerate the warp here. And then when you put your memory in there, the memory doesn't sit straight in the socket anymore. Again, to the human eye, it looks like it's going in and it's clicking, but the connectors, only 50% of your connectors or less are actually connecting because you've bent the socket like this, or you've bent the socket like that. And you can't really see it with the human eye. I can't emphasize that enough. But your RAM isn't making contact anymore. And so you watch all these enthusiast videos. They're like, tighten it as tight as you can get it. Don't listen to those people. They don't know what they're talking about. Many coolers these days, when you tighten it down, the screw will come to a complete stop. But there's still coolers out there that you can just keep tightening and tightening and tightening and tightening. And they're like, the tighter you can get it, the better your cooling. They couldn't be more wrong. They don't know what they're talking about. And they're telling you how to do it, and you believe them. So what ends up happening is now, it's very common, you think you've got a bad motherboard because now you've gone through all the time and investment of diagnosing each memory module and each socket, and you've identified it's a couple of sockets, and therefore, and again, this is just going to be fuel that's fed online, everybody's going to tell you, more likely than not, you have a bad motherboard. You're going to take the board out, you're going to send it back to the manufacturer or back where you bought it, you're going to do the whole job all over again. And maybe this time you don't tighten your cooler down as tight. And now maybe this time when you put your RAM in, it works fine. And now you believe you had a bad motherboard when there was nothing wrong with the board, ever, to begin with. It was you the whole time. And even though you fixed it and changing the board fixed it, you're the one, in most cases, that over-tightened the cooler inconsistently between the two boards. And if you would have simply loosened those screws on the cooler, just turn them a quarter of a turn, you likely would have straightened the board back out and your RAM would have worked, and you wouldn't have been through all this time, effort, money, and frustration just to go online and have people fuel you on. And it's not that they're doing it on purpose. They don't know any better. But this is where we talk about professionals versus enthusiasts. They have an idea, but they don't understand the engineering. So they get hung up on concepts, but they don't really have any explanation. It's just because that's why. Silly. It's so silly. So again, it's a David versus Goliath. The truth is out there, but unfortunately, it's quiet compared to the screaming of misinformation that is drowning out the good information. But if you look for it, you'll find exactly what I said to be true. Google it. Here's the thing about Google. If you want to know if you have a bad motherboard, Google it, and you'll find indications you have a bad motherboard. If you want to know if you might have warped your motherboard, Google it, and you'll find indications that you warped your motherboard. Google's going to show you exactly what you asked to see. If you think Windows 11 is the worst operating system and ask, is it the worst operating system, you're going to get links where people are saying it's the worst operating system. You're not getting an unbiased, full amount of information. It's honoring your request. So if you request negative information, you get negative information. It's a sycophant. It's a yes man. It tells you what you want to hear. If what you want to hear is how to fix the problem, you've got to know how to search for that. Because if you're convinced you have a bad board and all you're looking for is vindication, searching for reasons to verify you're right, that's all Google will show you. So the information that you're searching for, subconsciously, you are pre-predicting when you type in your search. So instead of searching for your beliefs, search for accurate information on how to get information that you really want. Because you don't really want to hear your board is broken. You don't really want to send it back. You want to fix it, and you want to fix it quick. And that is the main problem with Google searching. And here's hoping AI will resolve that miscommunication and start providing people with what they mean to ask. We're not there yet, but I can see that coming. Quite often, people will ask me questions that have nothing to do with their problem. How do I get this gigabit network card installed? You know, this was the 1990s. Why are you putting that in? So my internet will go faster. I can't get it to work. That's not how you make your internet go. Maybe today, but back then, you're just wasting your money. And this has been a constant thing since I've been a technician, is the constant misinterpretation of information from end users being fueled online by others encouraging the misinformation. And they end up spending money and time on something that has absolutely nothing to do with the problem they're trying to solve. I've had people ask me questions to this very day saying, what's a good utility to replace this other software utility? I've been using this since the 1990s. And now it doesn't work with Windows 11. So what's a good utility? I'm like, what are you trying to do? Because a lot of what they're trying to do is already built into Windows 11, negating the purpose of that utility. And rather than learn something new, they want to stay stuck in the past to use what they're familiar with. And they want to go backwards. And I'm like, look, if you want to do that, you do it without my support. I'm not supporting that. I'm not encouraging you to try and make everything look like Windows 3.1. You're allowed to, and I'm allowed to have nothing to do with it. A lot of the things that we used to do, and we had utilities for, have changed with a modern operating system. And if you take the time to learn those changes, you'll realize all this extra effort is all a complete waste of your time now. Just embrace the new technology. It's new, it's different, it might make you uncomfortable, but after a couple of weeks, it'll be secondhand to you, and you'll be flying, using your computer more efficiently than ever, with less junk that you're throwing on your system, and with system utilities crowding up your system and handicapping you, meaning that if you sit at somebody else's Windows 11 computer, you don't know how to use it without all your crutches. You're allowed to do that, and I'm allowed to tell you, I don't condone that behavior. It's just like having everything come to you because you won't get up off the couch. You're allowed to do that, but I won't. I'm not behind you on that. You won't hear me encourage that behavior at all. You want to grow as a human, you need to keep learning. And the technology is moving quickly. And if you're not moving with it, you're being left behind. And if you're trying to put cushions in to make more behind, being left behind last longer, all you're hurting is yourself. We don't do this in business. It's unacceptable. We don't have employees making customized changes to their desktops that interfere with productivity and limit their ability to, you know, I can't use the computer unless I have my little handicap piece of the, I don't know, start menu replacement so it looks like an old start. We don't do that, and you could lose your job if you modified company equipment in that way. You're supposed to know what you're doing. That's why you got hired. Home users, again, it's a whole different set of rules because you only answer to yourself. So if you want to handicap yourself and never get off the crutches for the rest of your life, nobody's telling you you can't. I'm just telling you, I'm not here to, I would never encourage that. You're only hurting yourself. I can't stop people from hurting themselves, but I definitely won't partake in being a participant in it. So we have misinformation. We have people that learned things 30 years ago that insist they're still true today. And, you know, being a technician for home users is unique in that way that you don't deal with in businesses at all. Businesses have policies and procedures, and you follow them or you lose your job. It's very simple. If it works for a business, it'll work for a home user. But just because it works for a home user does not mean it would work for a business. So again, I'm just trying to help you out. I'm not trying to insult anybody. I'm just saying there are consequences, and there's a difference between enthusiasts and home users. I'm sorry, between enthusiasts and business users, where the home users are spending more time and more money than a business ever would, and creating obstacles for themselves that they think are helping them, which a business typically would not permit any modification to business-owned equipment. So you get on board with everybody else. Everybody else is doing it. There's no reason you can't join along. Hop on. We can all do it. You can do it too. And when you do it, you just might find out it's a lot better in the future. It's a lot better. That's usually the response I get. I very rarely have somebody learn the new ways and go, the old ways were better. No. When they learn the new ways, they might be resistant to them at first. Give them at least 2 weeks and then ask them. And they'll say, oh yeah, now that I got used to it, it is better. It's almost universal. They just don't know what they don't know, so they're resistant. It's not a good attitude. If you want to stay up with technology, you've got to get the most out of it. You've got to learn what's changed and why, and it all makes sense. I assure you, once you see it, you'll say, oh, this is better. I'm trying to figure out which way these brackets go on. It looks like, and again, I've kind of glanced at the documentation. There's some diagrams, but I'm trying to just see if this is intuitive. And it looks pretty intuitive to me. If I bring this up here, it's getting heavy. Remember I said Intel sockets are square, perfectly square. So I could put a bracket on this way, or this way, or this way, or this way. AMD sockets are rectangular, meaning that this bracket, if I try to do it that way, it's not going to reach the other side. That's the long end of the rectangle. So obviously this has to go on the short end. The only thing I don't know, and I just put that there, only thing I don't know is, does it go like that with this cutout facing the CPU, or does it go like that? I do know that the screw that sticks up has to stick up, not down towards the board, because you could hit a capacitor or another surface mounted device on the board. And this has to screw into something, which is, there's nothing on the other side. So that's intuitive, right? This has to be threaded with the thread facing up. I just don't know which direction it needs to face. Now I can find out one of two ways. Pick a direction and dry seat the CPU to see if the screws line up. Or just take a look at the directions and see what the picture. I don't even have to read it. I just have to look at the pictures. Likely this little cutout goes towards the CPU, but that would be my intuition. And it may not line up with the documentation, but so far, so good. So these are my extra magnifiers, because the print, whatever this pitch size is of this font, is really super tiny. I've seen medicine bottles with bigger print. Let's see. Yeah, it shows taking the plastic brackets off. Oh, and there you go. It's a good thing I looked. That little, oh, I'll bring it up to the camera and show you what I'm looking at here. I guess I better take my glasses. The steps for installing this are just half of 1/4 of one page. So if you look at the documentation here, it says for AMD sockets, AM4 and AM5. So just this part of it right here, this is for Intel on the other side. And it shows taking the little plastic brackets off, lifting those out, and then putting these metal brackets in, just like we've done. But you see the bracket has this weird cutout, and that faces away from the CPU. The opposite of my intuition would say it goes towards, because the CPU looks like the socket kind of lines up with the width of that. So against intuition, the socket's actually going to be over here, and this will be on the outside, facing the away from the CPU socket. So that's all I needed the documentation for. That's pretty good. So I'm going to start with, I guess, this top one, and we'll just set that in there. Now again, laying this flat is probably the best way to do this. And then we've got these small thumb screws that are going to go on here, and they're going to hold that bracket in for us. There's a reason why we don't use tools to torque this down that I've already discussed. You're going to make this as tight as you can with your fingers. Don't get out any pliers. Do not do that. At least not if you want to do it right the first time. tight as you can get it with your fingers. So that's our first bracket right there. Second bracket is going to go exactly the same way with the screw facing out and this cutout facing away from the CPU socket. Just like that. And again, if the case were facing flat, I wouldn't have to worry about the bracket falling off. So I really should be doing this with the case flat, and I will have to lay the case flat to put the cooler on because of the weight of the cooler. Okay, so both brackets are on. So when we look at this cooler, and I'll bring this up to the camera and show you, we have these two screw points here. So again, on an Intel cooler, on an Intel CPU, this could go on any of 4 directions. On an AMD cooler, or on an AMD CPU, I mean, this can only go on one of 2 directions because AMD is a rectangular socket and the Intel's a square socket. So we want to pay attention to either this direction or this direction, depending on which way the airflow is moving, which right now, I'm trying to see if there's any indication on the fan. There may be some arrows that indicate airflow direct. Yeah, there they are right here. So the arrows on the fan, you want the arrow pointing towards me right now. This needs to be the back of the case. In other words, it's going to pull the air in from here, push it through the heatsink out this side, and we want it to come out right up against here or up here, depending on what our mounting options are. Because again, with AMD, we don't really get a choice. It's going to be, we don't have the choice we have with Intel, which is we could rotate that any of 4 directions. I had a client once complain when I sent them a computer that their AMD socket, AMD cooling fan was facing up and down instead of right to left. I said, it's not possible for the cooler you ordered that you wanted to install on an AMD socket that way. And they said, you don't know what you're talking about. And I said, well, then you do it and show me how to do it. Never heard from that customer again. So it looks like we have to go in. Oh, good. It will be just the way I want it to. So on an AMD socket, the screws that we use to mount this heatsink, they're down here. So the fan's in the way. We're going to have to take the fan off. But the fan does indicate with this arrow, and these screws do line up with these pegs so that we can put the fan in the right way. Like I said, I had a customer where the fan had to go in this way. And there's nothing you can do about it. It's a rectangular shape. That's just the way some manufacturers make them. And so I think I had it configured to blow the air out the top. And the only thing you can do is change your cooler if you're running AMD and you buy that kind of something to watch for on AMD if you care. Most people don't care, and I was very surprised to even get that call from the client. Who looks at it? It didn't run into any problems. It wasn't like it wasn't cooling. They just felt, based on the influencers they watch on YouTube, always the same, right? That fan should always be facing this way. Well, if that's an option, I would agree with you. The fact that it wasn't an option, they couldn't seem to get that through their head. So I'm glad that this is designed the way I want it designed, because that's the orientation I prefer. But it doesn't really make much difference in the actual cooling. All right, let's take these 2 screws out, which I guess we need to do to get the fan out. These are some chunky screws. Now this should lift straight up. And I want to remember the orientation of this fan. So give me just a minute here. I mean, it probably could be reversed, but I want to make sure that when I put this in, I guess it doesn't matter. I suppose if we just put this in either of the two directions and we get it, when we put the fan in, it's just important that we turn the fan around. I think it'll go in the other way. So it'll accommodate, hey, that's kind of clever, right? Logical, critical thinking. But if I want to keep it original, right, just because I'm OCD, and it was in like this, and I want to put it back that way, even though technically it shouldn't matter, then which way does this go in? This would go in with this side facing here. And that means with this side facing the rear of the case, that the input on the fan is going to be on my left, just like on any other cooler. Easy. So now I can remove this cover, which is protecting our pre-applied thermal compound, set this down onto our bracket. Ooh, that is awfully close to the top of our RAM. Wow. Let me just see if it's the same on the other side. So here's the problem. Once we put this cooler on, we will never be able to get the first RAM module out without the heatsink is hanging over the top of the RAM module. And my concern is when we tighten the heatsink down, is it going to connect and push down on that RAM module? Because we don't want them touching ever. If that RAM module had RGB on it, if that RAM module was this much taller, this wouldn't work. It wouldn't go on. It would smash into the RAM and it wouldn't go down any lower. And if you forced it, you'd break your RAM. On most motherboards, you typically get 4 sockets and you don't use the socket closest to the CPU, right? You use the second socket if you're only using 2 modules, but if you use all 4, you're right back to the same situation. So I'm not quite sure what Silverstone was thinking, other than if it's a server design, server RAM, if you look at a server motherboard, it's usually spaced a good 1.5 to 2 inches away from the CPU. Most motherboards, though, those sockets are maybe 1/2 inch or less away from the CPU. So it looks like both sides are the same, so that's unfortunate for us. Now, the good news is it's pretty rare that we ever have to replace RAM. The bad news is if we ever have to diagnose and try different RAM modules, we've got to take the heatsink out, change the RAM, put the heatsink back in, then test it. It doesn't solve the problem. Take the heatsink out, change the RAM, put the heatsink back in. That kind of sucks. All right, so we found an area that the Silverstone folks could have improved. What other manufacturers will do, like Scythe and others, is they'll cut into the heatsink on one side, make like an L shape to give you a little extra room and get access to that RAM, and it doesn't typically affect the cooling at all. They would just cut in and cut away the bottom. Could be 1 inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch. Cut that away all the way across, and then one side will have it and one side won't. Other times, they'll shift the whole cooler to the right or to the left so that one side sticks out more than the other side, which we've demonstrated with another example, the Scythe Mugen series. And that's done for the same reason, that it gives you clearance for your RAM on one side and overlaps your I/O on the other side. And that's how you know you've got it in the right way. Because this is reversible, I mean, that's nice that it's reversible. You can turn it either way. But it also means the same obstruction exists regardless. There's no way around it. So I would love to see a revision of Silverstone revisiting this with that cutout for the RAM the way that their competitors do it. And they might have themselves a really good competitor, especially at this price point. You know, you're spending $200 for a cooler. I don't expect to sacrifice my RGB RAM if I have it, which likely you wouldn't, you know, on a server. In this case, RGB is not a concern, but still being able to access the RAM to upgrade or replace it is obstructed by the heatsink itself. Which again, on a cheap heatsink, you go, well, that's what you get when you spend that little. On a heatsink that's nearly $200, I would just expect it to be a little more accommodating So we'll go ahead and affix the heatsink. We already know our RAM works, so I don't have any worries about that now. And I am a little curious of when we tighten this heatsink down, just how much clearance we're going to have from the top of the RAM to the bottom of the heatsink on that very first memory module. I think we're going to be okay, but it's millimeters. So you better have some low profile RAM. Yeah, it looks like we've got okay. We're going to be okay. Looks like it still has about 8 or 10, I'd say 10 millimeters of clearance there. Now notice when I tighten this down, the screws are coming to a stop. You don't see me torquing it down like a lug nut on a tire. But a lot of enthusiasts, again, I'm going to keep reminding you because I don't think I can ever say this enough because I'm way outnumbered out here in YouTube world. It's been said hundreds of thousands of times, probably, to over-tighten. And no matter how many times I repeat myself in the video, I won't even come close to matching the misinformation quantity that's out there. So here is what it's going to look like when it's installed. And you can see our clearance on the RAM there is awfully tight. In fact, even to the back fan, which is over here, just a little gap right there. So if you ever have to get into any wiring, you're going to have to take this off for any sort of maintenance that has to be done on the top end of the board. Now it's just 2 screws to take out the fan and 2 screws to take out the heatsink. I'll tell you another misinformation that I see a lot is somebody says, well, I've got to take the heatsink off and I don't want to do that because then I have to reapply thermal compound. No, you don't. Where'd they get that information from? If I take off this heatsink right now and turn around and put it right back on, where did the thermal compound go? Well, it's already mashed into the CPU. So it's the same thermal material. It's the same amount. If this system's 2 years old and I pull this heatsink off to change the RAM, I'm not changing the thermal compound unless I'm changing the CPU or I'm changing the heatsink or the thermal material is dried out. But in 2 years, that thermal material should be just fine. You put the same heatsink on the same CPU, you have to be completely oblivious to engineering to understand or to truly believe and advise your viewers that every time you take off a heatsink, it's a one apply only. Otherwise, when it's not like tape. It doesn't lose its adhesion. It's just a complete miscomprehension of how thermal compound works that's being propagated by enthusiasts on YouTube. And I realize I sound like I'm beating up on the enthusiasts, but they're making my life so hard. They don't realize they're doing it. I'm not saying they're doing it on purpose. They don't know any better. But I want you, my viewers, to know better. At the very least, at least you can understand the logic of what thermal compound does, what it doesn't do, when you need to reapply it and when you don't, what an expensive thermal compound is compared to a cheap one, why you don't over-tighten screws on your heatsink. I mean, we're just talking about one component here. We're talking about a cooler. Don't even get me started on the misconceptions about RAM, storage, motherboards, power supplies. It never ceases to amaze me how somebody has no academic education but thinks they understand it. And my question is, how do you know you understand it? Who tested you? Who qualified you? In other words, if I say I'm a computer technician, who gave me that title? If the answer is you gave it to yourself, you're not a computer technician. You cannot give yourself your own title. That is a title that is appointed to you as, for example, your job title. So if I'm hired as a computer technician, then I've been appointed a computer technician. You understand? I don't appoint myself. Otherwise, I'd just be president of the United States if that's how the world works. You don't get to choose that. It chooses you, and you have to be qualified to be chosen. Not everybody who wants to be that will qualify. How do they qualify you? Well, did you keep the job? If you convinced them to hire you, were you hired for a week or were you hired for years? That's how we separate the wheat from the chaff on social media. We have to figure out who's just yabbering on as if they know what they're talking about and making claims when they've never been tested by anybody to appoint the authority from any sort of authority position to verify what they're saying is true. They're self-policing, so of course they never do anything wrong. Well, I've investigated myself and found I did nothing wrong. Great. Great justice system you got there. This is not illegal to, sit there and spout false information that you truly believe is real without any sort of third-party verification to authorize or verify you know what you're talking about. You as the viewer are responsible for shifting through all this nonsense and misinformation. It's your responsibility. If I misspeak, if I get facts wrong, I'm a human being. It happens. And I don't realize I'm doing it when I'm doing it. But the difference is, I get paid to do what I'm doing. So when I do get things wrong, I'm usually held accountable and I'm forced to go back and correct my mistake. I have an incentive to not make that same mistake again. Whereas, somebody that has nothing at stake, they just have a YouTube channel. There's no consequence to misinformation. There's a consequence to the viewers, but they're oblivious to it. That doesn't happen in the real world where you're paid to do a job. You start costing that company some money, or you're not working to the pace of your coworkers, you're getting called in. It does kind of take the fun out of it though, doesn't it, right? When everything gets serious and you're like, oh, there's consequences, that's not fun. All right, so we want the fan to go in with the fan facing me. And then we'll grab our power cable here and get it out of the way. And tighten that bad boy back down. And then we'll run Cinebench R23 and see if we can keep the CPU cool. I have a feeling this chonky heatsink is probably going to keep it cool just fine. But will it be loud? We always have adjustments in the BIOS as well, if need be, but I'm just curious, just stock and default. Leaving it alone, which is my preference, leave it alone. Is it good out of the box being left alone? And if you're somebody who doesn't like to leave things alone, I'm the wrong channel for you, because I'm not somebody that experiments with my customers' computers. It's not good for business. Let me see which one of those headers is the CPU fan. I got 3 headers down there. I know that one that's a different color is for an all-in-one pump. That would run the speed of the fan full speed all the time. We don't want that one for sure. The other one should be a CPU fan. Oh, there's only 2. All right, so it's going to be the other one. Once again, these changes can be made to what the fan headers do, oftentimes in the BIOS. But that means that if you ever reset the BIOS or update the BIOS and you forget about those settings, you forget to put them back, you're going to get another service call from a complaining customer. Why is my computer so loud ever since you worked on it? You're going to be traveling out back to the customer's location at your expense, on your dime and your time, to put it back the way it's supposed to be the first time, because you screwed up, because you didn't stay with your defaults. If you stay with the defaults, all you do is reset everything back to default and you get the hell out of there. Everybody's happy. But if you're making modifications to your system that require you to go into the BIOS and make slight modifications, I hope you keep good records. And if it's just your computer you're doing it to, I still hope you keep good records. And if you've got 1,000 customers that you got to deal with 1,000 computers, I hope you keep really damn good records. I enjoy doing the work. I don't enjoy doing research. You might be the opposite. I'm just telling you how I work. Fan is hooked up, heatsink is in. Overall, a pretty easy heatsink installation. My only complaint is the overlap on the RAM, which I'm not quite sure how well you can pick up there. Let's go ahead and turn it on and see how it performs. So I'll grab my HDMI cable and we'll plug that in. And let me grab my power cable and plug in the power supply. And my internet cable after that, give it internet access. And then I need a keyboard and a mouse. There we go. All right. Can I turn the power supply on? Okay, power supply's on. Here we go. See with the front panel display all hooked up, how cool that looks. Fan isn't crazy yet. Let's get over to our HDMI port on the capture card and see if this thing is booting. Yep. And I can't tell if the fan is spitting. I think that's another downside to Silverstone's design, is I cannot see the fan. I feel air coming out the back, but I can't tell if that's just the air from the rear fan, or is it the combined air of the heatsink fan and the rear fan, because they're both moving the air the same direction. I can't tell if the CPU fan is turning. There doesn't seem to be any way to tell. So I think we have a little bit of a flawed design there as well, in my opinion. I would like to be able to visually see the fan spin on the heatsink. It's kind of an important fan. So a couple criticisms with this $170 heatsink from Silverstone, but ultimately, how does it perform? Because let's really check what matters here. Do I have Cinebench on here? I don't. Let me grab my flash drive. We have our old Cinebench results here from the liquid cooler that was on there, just if we want to compare what we're about to do. So you can see what our maximum temps were when we ran both the multi-core and single-core test. All right, let me get my flash drive in there, and let's get HW info back over there. I do feel like it's a little louder right now. Than it used to be with the liquid cooler, but the liquid cooler was buzzing, which was driving me crazy. Cinebench R23, we're going to bring that over. Let's go ahead and start up hardware info. Sensors only. Ooh, temps look really good right now. I'll tell you that. Let's bring up, I'll tell you what, let me get my flash drive out of there. Unplug that, put it away. And we'll start up Cinebench. Sorry, that's not the program, that's the photo. Program's over here, Carey. Cinebench. And we'll hit start. We'll come over here. Ooh, that CPU fan's getting seriously loud. I don't know if you can hear that fan. Let me cut a couple of audio filters here. We'll turn off our noise suppression and our noise gate. I'm going to stop Cinebench for a moment because I want you to hear the fan difference. Let me come over here for a second because I can't see the screen. Let's stop the test and listen. That's 100% an industrial CPU fan all day. So we'll start the test again and listen. These are our temps right through this. I mean, they're pretty good. The louder that fan gets, the better it cools. When you watch these numbers start to drop, if they drop at certain points of this test, you'll also hear those fans quiet down. And when this test ramps back up again, putting a lot of load on the CPU, you should hear that fan get louder. That's how you know if you're running hot or not. This should not be the normal noise level you hear. This should only be under extreme resource loads. If you're gaming and you're constantly under extreme resource loads, this is probably not a cooler you're going to like. Let me bring back camera 1 for a second and put it down in a corner so we can see each other. We have liftoff. Kinda. William Kaiser mentions the hardware monitor will show the rotation of the fans. This is true. I'm still old school. I want to see it, right? You could show me the data all day. I'm a see it to believe it guy. So the data's all well and good. The computer might say it's not raining outside, but it could be raining outside. You understand? I just don't trust data. I need to see this fan spinning. It's just a requirement I have. I don't trust computers, nor should you. Robert Jones joins us in the chat and says hello. I don't even have to look at the results of this test. I'll know from the sound of the fans when it's done, because I'm looking at a whole different feed than what you guys see. Sean Skinner joins us and says hello. David Graham says, I love rabbits. I often go down rabbit holes, don't I? guys are still talking about TV in there. NBC still uses the peacock logo. Yeah, during the Super Bowl, they had an ad that I thought was pretty clever, where they were saying that there was a new comedy show coming on, and it was on NBC or the Peacock Network, I guess, and it said, "Give comedy the bird." That's pretty good marketing. Will it quiet down if I turn off the turbo? So the turbo is only controlling the case fans, not the CPU fan. When turbo is turned on, you'll see a double H. Oh, I did have turbo on. Hold on. Did that turn itself on? Or did I press it? This is a fan controller, and maybe it enters into turbo mode automatically, sensing that the fans are reacting to heat, because it still says HH right here. And I don't recall turning that on. But whether I press it or I don't press it, it's not making any difference in the noise. You should be able to hear that. I'm kind of interested I'm sure that HH stands for something. What's happening is the CPU is getting so hot, and the BIOS is configured to run the fans faster based on the temperature of the system. Speaking of which, I haven't been keeping an eye on it. Let's see how we're doing on temps. So our maximum right now, after 7 minutes, looks to be about 89, just a shy of 90. I don't think we've broken 90 yet. And right now our temps are sitting in the 80s and 70s. And in a little over 2 minutes, the test will be done. These temps will drop to about a third of what they are, a little bit more than that. And the fans will quiet back to normal. And then you'll likely see this front display change to a 29 or a 30 as the case fans then respond from the BIOS that's controlling what's essentially a fan, but that information is being shared by an intelligent fan controller. So even though this looks pretty basic, it's actually quite advanced technology that SilverStone has here in this case that is responding to BIOS. I like that. I did not expect that. So we got some pros and some cons, Now in most cases, are we going to be running the CPU this hard? I wouldn't, but one of the advantages of an all-in-one cooler is it should never get that loud. But it is working and performing as SilverStone claims it would. I don't think they made any claims about the noise.
Holy fluff.
Holy fluff?
My goodness. That is
What?
loud.
What?
Did you say something?
Did you say?
What?
Hold on, this is too loud. What are you saying?
What? Yeah, so that's impressive, though. That's really impressive.
I don't like that it's overlapping the RAM.
Yeah.
I don't like that it's $170.
Right.
If it wouldn't overlap my RAM, maybe they could use a bigger fan that doesn't have to turn as fast. I don't know. They got it quieted. We can go in the BIOS and we can manually change it, but I'd like it to be a default and run. Again, in a server, you wouldn't even notice because server rooms are loud and often require ear protection.
Well, then how much noise are you going to get once you put the down?
Oh, it's not going to be much different. No. You're definitely going to notice it. That's exceptional.
Yeah.
Now, in 15 seconds, this test is going to be over. Tell me when you think the test is over. So you're opposite of me. You can't see the screen at all.
Right.
Okay?
14, 15.
No. Don't count. Just wait.
Okay. And you'll get that.
We just broke 90 degrees Celsius. Just broke it. It's still far under the 100 degrees Celsius limit, but still, at what price are we paying for that? Now listen. I'm not touching.
Oh.
What?
What? Perfect.
And did our display change from HH?
Not yet.
No, it still says
Not yet.
HH on there.
Give me a second. Unless you have to press the turbo button.
Well, turbo should speed it up. So it still seems to be locked in HH mode, which would be high speed mode. So I'm not sure what's going on with that.
Well, now it's perfect.
Did it change?
Yep.
Did I disconnect a cable? Geez, I might have disconnected the... There is a cable that goes off of the fan controller onto the motherboard. No, that's still connected. I didn't disconnect it. I don't know why that still says HH. I don't know.
Still aggressive.
So if you look at our results here, just for comparison to the liquid cooler, the all-in-one cooler, you'll see our maximum temps, right? And if I just minimize this for a minute, let's take this out of the way, close this out, and bring up the screen capture of the all-in-one liquid cooler. Let's do it like this. You can see the liquid cooler performed better and was quieter, but it did have an annoying gurgling or bubbling sound that sounded like a Zen fountain or something. I did not like it. Temperatures were much cooler with the smaller, quieter liquid cooler, all-in-one liquid cooler. Now our maximums up here, we did reach 89.5, which is only, what, from 90.5, 1 degree cooler. But all these other numbers are several degrees cooler, as much as 8 to 9 degrees cooler on a quieter liquid cooler. That's why I said with this kind of a chip, they can be very difficult to cool when you press them hard. Under normal operation, though, they should be quite manageable with the noise. Oh, yeah, under this one, it's what, 0.1 of a Celsius of a degree. I'm not quite sure the difference is night and day, but the noise difference most certainly is. Although, you know, those fans on the liquid cooler do get loud too. And this was a lot easier to install and a little bit cheaper than that liquid cooler, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. So, and it still says HH. I am really puzzled by the HH here. What is setting that to turbo? I'm wondering if I've knocked a cable loose and it's not on all the way. Let me just check real quick. That looks good, that looks good. That one looks good. Nothing, huh? I'm going to turn the system off and reset this fan controller because it shouldn't be doing that. So by tapping that power button, it will do a cycle. It'll shut the system off. We'll wait for that to turn off. We'll hit the button again, start it back up, and see if that fan controller does what it's supposed to do. Because I don't know why it's stuck on the HH. Before I turn this on, I want just to wait for the fans to stop spinning. Okay, turn it back on now. You should see the number cycle. We go back full screen on camera 1 so you can watch it too. Yeah, now we're back to 29 and 30. And then if I hit the turbo button, now it should say HH. So when it's at 29 or 30 there, it's whisper quiet. And I'm puzzled why it got stuck. Maybe a BIOS setting, I'd have to check. But When we add more components that are unnecessary, such as a fan controller, which is unnecessary in today's modern computers, we add complexity, right? We add an opportunity for problems. So you really have to decide, do you want to pay extra for an old school component that's obsolete, that ultimately is one more thing you've got to configure and one more thing that you might have to visit, such as this example here, where a regular, ordinary user would not have that, would not have this problem. I can't explain that. I don't know what happened. I also saw the turbo button was pressed in, and I don't remember pressing it. So let's run it one more time and see if we get the same result twice. So I'm going to jump back over here to the desktop. Where's my desktop? It's where did my desktop go? I've got a black screen here for some reason. Let me plug the HDMI cable and plug it back in. Okay, that's kind of weird. Let's go back to camera 1 for a second. And let's take camera 1 and minimize it again, right down to it. Now I see it. Okay, I don't know what I was doing wrong. So let's start up Cinebench. And let's just run the test again. And I'm curious, with the turbo mode off, we see that go to HH again. And the fans are going to get loud. Andy suggests maybe a different liquid cooler would be appropriate. Maybe. I mean, I'm not counting it out. SilverStone sent this to review it. We're doing what they asked us to do. It's definitely not as loud with turbo mode not on. If I turn turbo mode on, that will speed up the two fans in the front and the rear case fan. It's hard for you to hear the difference, but it kind of filled in. It didn't really necessarily make it louder, but I'll explain it. It just sounds like the same volume, but coming from multiple places instead of one place. Yeah, it's kind of hard to describe. Like a chorus versus a solo a cappella singer. They could all be singing the same volume, but when there's four voices at the same volume, it fills it in. It doesn't make it louder. That's what turbo mode seems to be doing here. But you notice it didn't go into turbo mode by itself, so I must have pressed the button and didn't realize it. But why it didn't go back when I pressed it again, maybe a logic error on the controller. I don't know. Bajan guy said he heard the difference? Okay. I mean, I can barely hear it and I'm in front of it. I'm assuming if I can't hear it, you can't. But the microphone may actually hear it better than I can. Remember, this is a cooler that's designed for a server. And as I turn the case away from me, you will hear the sound is mostly coming out this side, right? It kind of makes sense. That's where the fan is, that's where the motor is. If I had a boom microphone and I turned away from it and was talking, you would be having a hard time hearing me. That's why I wear a lapel mic. It follows where I look. But anybody with a boom mic, the minute you turn your voice away, it can be hard to hear them. In much the same way, I'm sure you can hear that difference. And there's some nice warm air coming out of the back of this, let me tell you. Anybody want to roast a chicken? It's not that warm, but it's warm, but it's not warm enough to roast a chicken. I am embellishing that a bit. So the question in the chat is, can't you just replace the fan in the heatsink with an actual fan? Well, I'll go back to what I already said. If you're buying brand new parts and those parts are not adequate to meet your needs, you should not be modifying those parts. You should be returning those parts. If you want an actual fan to replace the fan on your heatsink because it's too loud, then replace the heatsink and the fan with an actual heatsink and fan. Get everything under the same warranty. Don't modify something brand new. It's a nightmare to support that for your customers. If your fan is warranted by one company, your heatsink's warranted by another company, and you've got 1,000 customers and they're all different, you just made a nightmare for yourself. You know, a Noctua, what is it, the DH14 and H14? That'll give you your Noctua fans, and it's a bigger cooler, which is going to definitely block our RAM. I wasn't sure if this went into HH mode all by itself based on temperatures, but it doesn't look like it does that. I must have pressed it and just didn't realize it. Supreme Nerd says, well, you won't have to worry about it overheating. I think you're right. I think you're right. It does get hot. It does get up to 90 degrees Celsius. That's still a good 10 degrees of headroom before thermal throttling. So you are right. If we put the side panel on, how loud is it? We'll find out. Let's see, which side is this? Is this reversible? Did you notice any difference? Mostly the sound seems to be coming out of the back. Any rotation any other way than the back, it gets quieter. With or without the side panel doesn't seem to make any difference to me. If it's quieter, it's not. It's only marginal. It's pretty damn loud. I wouldn't sell a computer that gets this loud to a customer. I wouldn't do it. This is not acceptable for sale. This might be acceptable for you at home, but not for me. You have different standards. I'm just telling you about my standards. Phil Stott said after glasses comes hearing aids. Yeah, well, I don't think you're wrong. Especially after listening to very loud music for the 80s decade. Yeah, even today I like to surround myself with music. Something Crazy said, well, it's just a beast of a CPU. Well, this is true, but even beasts can be tamed with the right cooler. We don't have to say good enough. We just don't have the ideal cooler for the setup. That's all I'm trying to say. Does it get the job done? Yes, but could another cooler get the job done for the same or less money while reducing noise? Also yes. Every beast can be tamed. All right, I don't think I need to let this continue. I kind of feel like we got the gist of it. Let's go ahead and stop the test. Will a noise optimized fan make a difference? Well, we can go into the BIOS and we can adjust the fan curve so that it doesn't ramp up until it gets really, really hot. But we're also going to raise our maximum temperatures. We're going to get higher to that 100-degree ceiling in doing that. That's why, you know, there's usually like a silent mode that's going to be the quietest, but your chip's going to get the hottest. There'll be a performance mode that's going to keep your chip the coolest overall, but also be louder overall. And then you've got the balanced middle, which is usually the default, which is where I like to keep it. Because if I have to optimize the fan for a customer's computer, and that customer calls me in for service where for some reason I reset or update the BIOS and lose that setting, how am I ever going to remember what I set it to? So again, if you're a home user and you're just dealing with your own home computer, it's your problem. Knock yourself out. But if you're trying to maintain a customer base and you've got hundreds of customers, maybe you're not even that big. Maybe you only have a couple dozen customers. It's a lot to keep track of, especially if those customers are only calling you once every few months. You can't remember what you set a certain BIOS to at a certain customer. If one customer is a business with 15 computers and they bought those computers at different times, if those were made by Dell or HP, you wouldn't be doing any of this. You know that, right? This is a custom build scenario that only exists in custom builds. And even then, it only exists because you didn't buy the right components for that outcome. The component covering up the RAM is a big negative for me. The price of it is a bit negative for me because I know other coolers can cool this at the same level of noise for less money. On the other hand, I'm not working on servers. That's really what that cooler is designed for. Let's make no mistake about it. The fact that it works on consumer computers is a throwaway. I honestly don't think SilverStone expects they're going to sell very many server coolers that are backwards compatible with home users' computers. There's going to be a few, but that's not. Most of the people that are going to buy that cooler are buying it to fit into a 4U rack. That's what it's for. It won't have a problem with the RAM. And the server room is loud. You're not even going to hear these fans because all the other fans, it's noisy in a server room. This is not the right part. This is not the optimal part for what I'm trying to achieve. What I want to achieve is a quiet computer with a high-end processor that doesn't make any buzzing or gurgling sounds like the cooler we had, that doesn't run and overheat if we were to put on an inefficient cooler, and also doesn't get that loud. It will get louder as the temperatures creep up. There's nothing you can do about it. But yes, Noctua is probably a great example of a heatsink fan combination that will keep that chip cool. And likely will cost about the same amount of money. But I also believe Thermalright may have a solution for half the price and similar installation method, very easy, and probably half the level of decibels of noise would be my guess. So still noticeable, as it should be. I want to hear when the system's being pressed hard. I want to know it's, the fan is working, it's doing its job. But I don't want to hear that constantly. So right now, you can barely hear the fan at all. But if somebody were to say, hey, I want to throw a graphics card and I want to play, some AAA title game, it's quite possible that fan's going to be running the whole time you're playing that game. Not ideal. And also, if I were to put a computer like this, never mind the case, just a new system with that level of processor in an office for somebody who's working with some resource-intensive application. It's usually one or two individuals within an office. It's not everybody. Most people are just opening email, Word, PDF files. It's all pretty much business, spreadsheets, stuff like that. So likely they would never push this that hard, where that heatsink would actually do the job, except if they had a problem and I had to diagnose it and it was dealing with potential RAM issues, I'd be having to take the heatsink off and on and off and on and off and on to figure out what's going on with the RAM. So that's not ideal sustainably. I'm playing a game of chess. I'm not worried about looking at what's going to happen the rest of today. I'm thinking about tomorrow. I'm thinking about next week, thinking about next month, thinking about 6 months from now. That client that we recently built a computer for, it was 12 years. 12 years. I sold him a computer and I didn't hear from him again for 12 years. Do you think I have any memory of even the customer in the transaction? He bought 2 computers, which I appreciate his business, don't misunderstand me. He might have called for some technical questions now and again, but I take those from the audience anyway, so I don't necessarily assign that to somebody who bought a computer from me, especially the more time goes on. So if he asked a question 4 years after he purchased it, I probably don't remember who he was. I just answered his question the same as anybody else. So when 12 years goes by, now he wants to upgrade, I don't even know what I sold him. I gotta, take a look. Which processor? Oh, it's a 4th gen Intel. Wow, that was a long time ago. Well, that's not upgradable. We're gonna have to replace everything. Like, I gotta figure out what it was. So when you're selling systems and you've got custom components like this in there, and they only work well under certain conditions, and now whoever had this computer in the office got a new computer, or they left the company and they said, well, let's take this computer and give it to this other person in the office. Now this other person in the office is using more resources and they start calling and complaining about the noise, and I have to answer their question. Now, if it's a computer I just built, I know exactly what the problem is. But if it's a computer where potentially I adjusted the BIOS and I have no recollection of it, and now the problem they're having is in the move, the BIOS got lost and they just reset it and booted it, and now it's loud, and I got to drive all the way out there, because I can't do this remotely, to wherever they are to go into the BIOS and push the buttons for them. They're not going to be happy with the downtime. I'm not going to be happy with the travel time. And the question is that a billable service? So we want everything to work out of the box default with no special settings when you're dealing with other people. For yourself, you do whatever you want. But when you're dealing with other people and you're held accountable to it, and you want those people to come back and buy more from you and refer you, keep those people happy. Keep it simple. Don't put in hardware you don't need. Don't charge them more than you need to charge. Don't sell them things they don't need to have. That's my philosophy. Then you're saving them money, and with all those extra items they didn't need, that also includes all the potential things that could break that they didn't need to begin with that are now needing service. When if you wouldn't have sold it to them to begin with, that would have never been a potential to break. It would have never been a service call, and it probably would have saved the customer money and saved you frustration, especially if there's issues on the billing side of things that they feel it should be a warranty issue and you feel like they should pay it. If all you're doing is warranty work, I don't know how you're going to pay your rent at the end of the month. It's one thing when one customer does it, and if you've got 100 customers, even a few dozen customers, and at any given time those customers call and require warranty work, I hope to God you're not doing more warranty work than billable work, because I don't know how you're going to stay in business. You just won't be able to pay the bills. So when I'm thinking way ahead. When I'm selling a computer to a client, this is a chess game. I'm thinking well into the future. How serviceable will this be? How easy will it be to work on? How quickly can I get in and out to minimize my warranty time? And how likely am I going to need to work on it? I can't prevent all the chaos of life, but there are certain predictable things that are likely that I can avoid by simply not introducing those parts. Thomas says, what about testing a Be Quiet cooler? You know, we've got a couple Be Quiet coolers sitting here that we could test on it. I would probably lean to Scythe, to be honest. And the reason I would is I know the Scythe cooler it works really, really well in other high-end chips, and it's very affordable. If we look at the, and I could be wrong, okay? I'm just based on my experience with different coolers. For the money, the noise level, RAM obstruction, ease of installation, the Mugen 6 is $56. Oh, there's a $5 off coupon, so it's $52 right now. Let's go back to window capture. And I would just put the one fan on. Whenever I install a Mugen 6, I never put the rear fan on. I think it's a waste of time and money, and it adds noise, and one more cable that's got to get hooked up, one more fan that will eventually fail. So just keep it off there, you don't need it. Do your own tests. If you don't believe me, run your own heat tests with one fan versus two on any cooler you've got. More than likely, that second fan that's more towards the outer edge is completely useless, or is making no more than a 3 degrees Celsius difference. And I mean, if your system runs that hot, that 3 degrees Celsius makes a difference, it sounds like you just don't have a good cooler on there, or you didn't install it right. So I would take the fan off, just throw it in the box, give it to the customer. If the fan, when or if the fan should fail, they've already got a replacement. They don't have to pay for it. Will this cool a 9950 X3D? That's the question. When this came out, they were testing it with the latest generation of the 7950 X3D, and it doesn't look like it's been updated for the chips that have come out since then. And maybe somebody's reviewed it with the same chip we've got, I don't know. But I can tell you, I feel like it's a really good deal. I know it won't interfere with our RAM like this one does. It's black, which is visually more appealing, but again, on this case, we don't have a see-through panel, so I guess that ultimately doesn't matter. And it's $100 less than the cooler that's in there now. So this person's, yeah, of course it's going to cool that. That's nothing. 7950. See, these are all from 2024. Do we have anything new? 2025, that's still over a year ago. Does he say what he's cooling? Never says what a CPU is. Oh, this one's using a Core Ultra 9 285K. That's about as high-end as you go on the Intel side for a consumer processor. Runs cool and quiet all the time. Doesn't interfere with memory. I don't like it's a little heavy. Well, okay. I mean, I guess if you got to complain about something. Come over here to camera one. Anyway, those are my thoughts. I think maybe the Mugen would be a good solution. I don't think I have a Mugen 6. I think we ended up using it. But it's cheap enough to order it. Let's get back over to chat room. Phil Stodd said that CPU has a default TDP of 170 watts. That's a lot of heat to be dissipated under full load. Well, like I said right in the beginning of the video, this is a difficult chip to keep cool. It's pretty common knowledge. So liquid cooler would obviously be preferred for that reason, because a liquid cooler should take care of it regardless. An air cooler, that's where you got to pay a little bit more attention to the specifications of the cooler. William Kaiser mentions you might want to look at a 140 millimeter cooler for a 170 watt TDP. What was the Mugen's rating? I don't even remember what it said. Not that you can necessarily believe the ratings, but it says it's rated for a TDP of...
I'm gonna turn my filters back on before I forget. TDP 150. Is that right? 150? And we need 170. Yeah, it may not be enough. But you can't necessarily just look at the data and do the math, because the reality could be that it's more than enough. You really have to test it. I can't stress that enough. Or you need to find another content creator that's done the test. You know, using that CPU and that cooler. And what worked well for them will probably work well for you. Otherwise, you got to do the research yourself. But yeah, the Mugen may come up a bit short. I mean, it's a big ask to do a 170 TDP. Yeah, that's no joke. All right, well, this was fun. Did you have a good time? I just feel elated that I've got that damn Thermaltake cooler out of there. Man, I never want to see that Thermaltake cooler again. I'll take this any day over the Thermaltake, but it's still not to my standard. I would not deliver this to a customer like this. We do have a couple of extra liquid coolers that have been sitting here in a box for a couple of years. I don't know if they're socket AM5 compatible. That's my problem. So I'd almost rather order something specifically for this. This is such a nice build. You know, I don't want to cheap out and just go with what I've got on hand. That's an enthusiast thing. I want to be professional, and I want to do it the right way, not the cheapest way, or not from this is what we had. During the pandemic and you had limited accessibility to parts, that's a different story. But just cheaping out and taking a lazy way, it's not professional. So I'm going to say let's do it right, or let's not do it at all. And to get this far and to be so close to being done, I don't want to say close enough. Not in my, it doesn't work in my world, not when my reputation and my career are on the line. It's a slippery slope. You start with one, and before you know it, you've lost your reputation. You can't be trusted anymore. You've lost customer confidence, and you'll never get it back. It's very unlikely that you'll ever get customer confidence back. Once you lose it, time to get new customers or change your career. Just because you wanted to take an easy way out. It's not sustainable in business to take the easy way out. You can do it sometimes, but if you keep doing it, and it starts with once, so if you never start down that path, it's something you don't have to worry about. So I'd rather not even go down that path. I'm just looking at my shelf over there to see what coolers I've got. I wonder if Thermalright, this might be a good excuse to use a Thermalright cooler. Let me take a quick look on Amazon. Thermalright. $170 watt. Put 170 TDP because watt is not really working for my search.
Well, I mean, if you believe marketing, I'm just saying, I don't know. Seems too good to be true. This Thermalright with as a 140 air cooler claims TDP of 275 watts. And it's $45. Come on now. Could that be real? Is it worth $45 to find out? Have it in black for $5 more. You can see how they've raised the CPU fan and the heatsink are cut out to make room for the RAM. And the fan, as you can see here, you can adjust the fan up or down based on where you place the buckle. So you've got all your RAM clearance, and it's $130, $120 less than this SilverStone. Not to beat up on SilverStone. Again, I appreciate that they sent it to me, but it really is designed for a server. That seems clear to me. And I said it right out of the gate. I was afraid it might be industrial. And industrial means it's going to be noisy. That's almost a universal truth. Even if you buy a Noctua fan that says industrial, it'll be one of the loudest fans you've ever heard, even though it says Noctua on it. Ask me how I know. Had to return those fans. Long story short. All right, so what has this been? A three-hour tour? Did the boat sink? Yeah, I think it's a good time to wrap it up for today. Well, I appreciate you guys joining me on this little explorative journey here to see how this cooler performs. And I thank SilverStone for sending it. If I ever need a cooler for a server, the noise is not an issue on a server. Now this system is dead silent. I have to look at the lights to see if it's on. I can't even tell if this is on right now. So the good news is it's not running 24/7 at those speeds and noise levels. But on the other hand, I would like the end user to be able to push this as hard as they want to. Yes, you're going to get some noise no matter what, but it shouldn't be that much noise. Is a little over the top. And again, covering up the RAM, that really bugs me. And for the price at $170 for that cooler, yeah, $170 is an easier pill to swallow if you're cooling down a $12,000 server. $170 is a small percentage of your overall cost. But if you're cooling down a $600 processor, I don't know, what's a 9950X 3D sell for these days? $660 plus sales tax. In Arizona, it's about a 10% of sales tax, so you're looking at about a $700 processor. So spending $170 to cool it is a significant percentage of just the cost of the CPU. So when with the RAM and the motherboard and everything, we probably have, let's say, a $1,500 computer without a graphics card, right? Just using internal graphics. And $170 out of that $1,500, that's a pretty significant piece of your system price. So I like everything to sort of balance out. I don't want a $500 cooler on a $200 chip. I'm funny that way. Something Crazy said, I'd recommend an Arctic Liquid Freezer 3 Pro, but it's pricey. I don't think we've ever used an Arctic freezer cooler, but not a liquid cooler. I've got a few in boxes over here, but just haven't any opportunity to use them. William Kaiser said, basically a 120 millimeter air cooler is okay for anything up to 140 watts. Just not this one. I'm sure it's an awesome CPU. I run an i5 13500 and my Noctua U12S with another fan for pulling works fine in the VRMs, yeah. Bill Stott said, looking at the gap between the fans on the thermal right cooler, it may have a good chance of dissipating that much heat. Yeah, I mean, there's one way to know for sure, right? Andy says, thank you, Carey and Marlena. Thank you, Andy. Thanks for hanging out with us. William says, test the thermal right cooler. Higher RPM equals more noise. Absolutely. And the bigger the fan is, the less the RPM will be. Smaller the fan is, higher the RPM will be. Higher the RPM, higher the noise. Andy said it was a nice way to spend part of the afternoon. Right on. Well, it's been great having you here. Rajin Guy said it was a nice experiment to see if this cooler would work. Yeah, and we don't normally use SilverStone coolers, so I was open-minded. Let's try it. It's not terrible. I do think for the price it's overpriced, but again, if we were putting it into a server like it's initially designed, that price is fine. If anything, it's pretty good in that respect. Andy says the Nano KVM Pro version 2 is on this side of the Pacific. It just cleared customs, so it should be here in a couple days. Yeah, hopefully you'll see it Thursday or Friday. Let us know. Appreciate the update. Something Crazy said the LF3 Pro 360 ARGB. I don't want to do RGB. No. If it's got RGB on it, I don't want it. I'll tell you right now. I don't want the cabling. I don't want the software. I don't want to deal with any of that nonsense. So I appreciate your suggestions, but if your suggestion has the word RGB in it, you're not going to see it on this build. There's no transparency on this build. This is a 90s sleeper, so we want it to have modern day high-end components hidden underneath what looks like an old vintage rustic computer. That's what we're going for. Classic sleeper. There was no such thing as RGB when cases like this were popular. It did not exist. So let's want to try and keep that retro mod kind of, we're not restoring to something original. We're restoring something old that looks the same on the outside, but is completely modernized on the inside. I love when people do that with cars. If somebody takes an old car, like an old Mustang, and they restore it back to factory, it wasn't a good car. Restoring it back to factory, I can appreciate and respect the effort that takes, but your ride quality still sucks, your air conditioning still sucks. You're not going to have any modern radio or Bluetooth or sound system. I want to see that Mustang restored to look like it's original on the outside, but I want a more comfortable seat, a more comfortable steering wheel, better handling, better suspension, better air conditioning. Make it modern inside. And I'm on board with that all day, but that's just my preference. ZZ Top, they used to have a car, and they might still have it, at an old like 32 Ford. And it looked pretty much like a chopped 32 Ford on the outside. And on the inside, it had plush seats, and it had phono jacks to plug their guitars in so they can play the guitar over the stereo system while the other person's driving. Or they could park and actually turn it into a sound system for like a makeshift concert. Who does that? That's so damn cool. It's hard to believe this machine is on. I mean, it is dead silent right now. I thought this machine was off. I keep looking to see if the lights are on. I can't tell. So if I want to turn this off again, I can just, like any other computer, just tap the power button. It'll cycle through the power off session properly. It doesn't just cut the power like a reset. It does shut it down properly. Yeah. The fans ramped up just in a moment before it turned off, and then they shut off, and it's back to being dead silent again. All right.
Yeah, maybe we'll test the thermal right cooler. I don't know. Let me think about it. And I appreciate your suggestions and hanging out with me today and all of our discussions. I'm going to put our email address up here if you don't want to email us for anything. That is how you will reach us right there. showcasecreate@gmail.com, and Sable the cat will be sure to get back to you. She's actually quite technically savvy and is pretty quick at answering emails. She's a fast typer, especially when she's using the mouse. That cat really knows how to use a mouse, let me tell you. And we love hearing from you guys, so reach out anytime. If we can help, we will. Johnny says he's read that CPU can get up to 300 watt TDP when tested with Prime 95. I wouldn't be surprised. That's why I say you have all this theory and you have all this data. Okay, but the theory and the data can quite often, in my experience, be completely irrelevant and disconnected from reality. And there's a number of variables for that, from the BIOS on the motherboard, the version of the BIOS, to the atmosphere and the environment that you use the computer in, to whether or not you install the cooler correctly with the right amount of thermal paste, things like this, where they can vary from person to person, and it can be very hard to get an overall accurate assessment of wattage consumption that would be similar to your experience. So at some point, you just got to try and see for yourself. And no matter what anybody says, no matter how many people tell you it's not raining outside, if you look outside and it's raining, who are you going to believe? The data or the reality? So keep in mind that when you're looking at data, you should not trust it until it's been verified personally by you or someone you personally know and trust. Otherwise, it should be taken as hearsay and as potentially correct. Until verified, it's a theory. And when you and I test the same thing, we could get very different results. And what I find the data to be true, you might find the data to be false. Who's right and who's wrong? That's why reality, it's so variable. It's very difficult for us to say. There's too many components that are varying and too many environments that are varying that all interact with each other and will have a direct a direct result that may vary from one person to the other, from one environment to the other, or a different motherboard to a different motherboard, or a different power supply, or different case design, different airflow. There's way too many variables here to say that, you know, you should expect this because that person did. And it's okay, you can expect it, but you have to prove it out. At least I do. Jim Kenny mentions a DVD in the front as a sleeper. Works for me. Well, now that we have the liquid cooler out of the way, that's the other thing. If we put a liquid cooler in here, you know, we could take that part out and put a DVD. We could still buy a Beige DVD on Amazon. I'm sure they still sell them, and we could pop it in there. But when we have a radiator there, it blocks this top, so we'd have to put the DVD in. Wouldn't look right. So that's actually what I'm thinking of why I want the air cooler. If we could mount a radiator up front, that'd be a different story, but there's no other place to mount a radiator, unfortunately. I dropped my panel inside of there. I gotta go get it, fish it out. And so the journey continues. Well, I couldn't ask for a better time for the industry to be slow so I can fart around with stuff like this, because I would keep this. I wouldn't necessarily sell it to a customer, but as long as it's running this loud, I would definitely not sell it. I would always, anything I keep, you know, even this little guy down here, it has to meet my standards that if somebody said I'd like to buy it, that I could say, okay. I don't want to say I don't want to sell it because it doesn't meet my standards. That would kind of make me a hypocrite, right? So you'll use it, but you won't sell it to me. That's right. How would you trust anybody like that? The fact of the matter is,
every system I build, I'm not going to be happy with it until it meets the same exact requirements as any other system I've ever built, going all the way back to when I started in this business. And, you know, to what the norms are at the time. Things have changed. And so the standards have changed. And I expect to be at modern standards, not below them. You can be at them or above them, but you can never be below them, not putting my name on it. So even though I would plan on keeping this, I still want it done right. So if an opportunity, someone said, hey, take my money, and I'm like, I don't want to sell it. What if I gave you some more money? Okay. But I wouldn't want to sell it if I wasn't happy with it. Then I'd say no, because I'm afraid that you're going to regret that purchase. You're going to want to return it to me when you hear how loud it is. And then you're going to think, well, does this guy really know what he's doing? So it has to meet my standards, period, end of story. And until it does, it won't be sold. That much I'll tell you for sure. Bill Stodd said maybe the next release of this case will have an option for front mount water cooling. It certainly doesn't hurt to recommend it to Silverstone. I mean, they just came out with it, but you know, there may be a revision next year or something, and we could give them some ideas to think about. Yeah, for sure. Thomas says, great show, Carey. Good night and peace. Thank you, Thomas. All right, guys. Well, again, thanks for hanging out. I've enjoyed your participation and your company. Thank you to all the members. Thank you to Buster. And geez, did we ever check email? I don't think I ever checked it. Oh, Paul Vircher sent an Amazon gift card. I'm sorry, Paul, I just saw this. He says, I hope you enjoy this Amazon gift card. I'm enjoying the content. Again, thank you, Paul. And Buster. I'm working with Nick on some updates to the optimizer. So that's coming along. If you haven't purchased the optimizer, you might want to think about it. And we have links for that in the video notes below today's video, along with links to the cooler from Silverstone and Amazon. If it might be the right cooler for you. I don't know. Also, the case and the motherboard and the processor, and the RAM. We bought it all from Amazon. Silverstone did send us the case, the power supply, and the cooler, just for full disclosure. And we really appreciate Silverstone giving us an opportunity to test. I love the power supply. I love the case. Not in love with the cooler. I'm sorry. I hate to say it. But again, I think if we were trying to work on servers, I'd feel differently about this cooler. But with that, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you all again very, very soon. Until next time, bye for now.